Aiden Vale opened his eyes and saw a dark wooden ceiling. His head felt as if someone had driven a rusty nail into his temple. He was lying on a narrow bed in a room the size of a storage closet. Someone was talking on the other side of the wall. He tried to sit up and realized his body wouldn't obey him. His arms were thin, his legs were weak. He looked at his palms and didn't recognize them. They were a boy's hands. Skinny fingers with bitten-down nails. On his left wrist was a fresh bruise shaped like someone else's grip. Someone had twisted his arm. Recently. He sat up on the bed and the room began to spin. Someone else's memories flashed through his mind. Aiden Vale, 18 years old, the youngest son of the youngest branch of the Vale family. His mother died in childbirth. His father died 2 days ago. His older brothers had died over the past 3 years. One fell from a horse, the second drowned in a river. The third drank the wrong wine at a feast. All accidents, all convenient. Aiden was the last one, and he knew for certain he wouldn't live much longer. These thoughts belonged to the boy who had lived here before him. A boy who was afraid of every knock on the door. A boy whom they called Baron Nothing at the academy. Third from the bottom in fencing out of 23. Quiet. Weak. A bookworm with no friends and no future. But now it wasn't that boy sitting in this body. Now it was Daniel Cho, 34 years old, an auditor for an oil and gas corporation in Houston. 8 years of evaluating reserves and dead assets. A man who looked at maps and satellite images and saw what boards of directors didn't see. He died in the elevator. The cable snapped, 41 floors down. His last thought was that he'd never learned to spend money on himself. And now he was here, in someone else's body, in a strange world, with someone else's pain in his wrist and someone else's fear in his chest. He stood up. His legs were shaking, but they held him up. He walked over to the window and looked outside. The courtyard of a large stone house. Servants were running about. Guards stood at the gates. Flags bearing coats of arms. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a delusion. This was another world. And at that moment, something happened that changed everything. A translucent line flashed before his eyes. Blue letters hung in the air right above the windowsill. The assessor system activated. Level 1 of 10. Auditor's gaze. He blinked. The letters didn't disappear. He rubbed his eyes. The letters remained. A new line glowed above the windowsill. Tree, ink oak, age 90 years, condition 34 out of 100, wood-boring beetle in the right corner. Aiden stared at those words. Then he slowly turned his head toward the wall. Stone, river limestone, 60 years old, a crack in the load-bearing wall behind the plaster, 4 centimeters deep. He looked at the bed. Frame, ash, cost, 2 gold pieces, actual value, accounting for wear and tear, 11 silver pieces. He looked at his hands. Aiden Vale, 18 years old, health, 31 out of 100, exhaustion, an old fracture in his left wrist, it had healed improperly, potential, question mark, question mark, question mark. 3 question marks instead of an answer. The system couldn't evaluate him, or didn't want to. The door swung open without a knock. A man of about 45 entered the room. Broad shoulders, an expensive doublet, a ruby ring on his index finger. An authoritative and calm face, the face of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Scarlet letters flashed above his head. Ansel Vale, 46 years old, head of the Vale clan. Fencing, 61 out of 100. Politics, 78 out of 100. Hidden secret. Poisoned Reynold Vale with a slow-acting poison 47 days ago. Reynold Vale. That name hit Aiden like a slap in the face. The father of this body. His father. His uncle had poisoned his father. Aiden stood by the window, staring at those crimson letters. Ansel smiled at him with the broad, warm smile of a relative who had come to comfort an orphan. The boy who had lived in this body before would have believed that smile. Daniel Cho hadn't trusted Smiles since he was 22. Ansel said he understood his grief, that losing a father was a terrible blow, that the clan would take care of him, that the Elders' Council was scheduled for tomorrow and Aiden's future would be decided there. He spoke gently and confidently. Every word he uttered felt like a hug, and above his head the word poisoned burned. Aiden nodded. Aiden thanked him. Aiden played the part they expected of him, a broken boy with nowhere to go. Ansel patted him on the shoulder and left. The door closed. Aiden sat down on the bed and closed his eyes. Numbers swirled in his head. 47 days. A slow poison. 3 dead brothers in 3 years. 1 fell from a horse. 1 drowned. 1 drank the wrong wine. Now his father. Someone was systematically and meticulously weeding out this branch of the family, and the only one left alive was a weak, quiet boy whom no one took seriously. They'd saved him for last, because he wasn't even worth the urgency. Aiden opened his eyes. There was no fear, only cold calculation. In his past life, he'd seen corporations write off entire divisions. People were laid off by the thousands. Factories were shut down. Assets were shifted around. All for the sake of the numbers in the quarterly report. It was the same here. Only instead of divisions, they were writing off people. And instead of a quarterly report, there was the clan council. The morning of the council arrived quickly. The hall was large, a long table made of dark wood, 12 chairs. Seated at the table were the senior representatives of the Vale clan. Aiden knew there from the memories of the body's former owner. Uncle Ansel at the head of the table. Cousin Marvin to his right, 22 years old, broad-shouldered, a smug smile. Above his head, the system displayed, Marvin Vale, 22 years old. Fencing 44 out of 100. Leadership 18 out of 100. Hidden secret. Owes a loan shark 600 gold pieces. Lost it all gambling. The other council members all looked alike. Well-fed faces, expensive clothes. None of their loyalty ratings toward Aiden rose above 5. Ansel began to speak. He spoke of the clan's duty, of hard times, of the great reassessment which would begin in half a year. For the first time in 60 years, the Guild of the Queen's Assessors would tour all the provinces and assign new ranks, from F to S. Rank F meant write-off. The crown would take the province and divide it among those deemed worthy. Rank S meant a royal domain. Between them lay a whole hierarchy: taxes, the right to vote in the royal council, and the right to marry into other families. Everything depended on rank. Ansel said that the family must concentrate its resources, that each of the family's provinces would receive support in accordance with its potential. Marvin receives clear meadows, rich land, good harvests, 3,000 souls. Rank B is guaranteed. Cousin Elara receives honey shore, river trade, 2,000 souls, at least a C rank. Then Ansel turned to Aiden and smiled. You get Westmarch. He uttered the word as if tossing a bone to a dog. A chuckle rippled through the hall. Marvin didn't even try to hide his smirk. Westmarch. Aiden knew that name from the memories of his former body. The swamps on the northern border. The plague 10 years ago. There used to be 700 souls. A little over 200 remain. Not a single stone building. Rumors of a creature in the quagmire. A province everyone considered dead. Ansel placed the Westmarch seal on the table. Bronze, tarnished. He set it down as if he didn't care. Everyone expected Aiden to refuse. Everyone expected him to sign his abdication and retreat to a monastery. The cell was already ready. Aiden stared at the seal. Then he looked up at his uncle. The crimson letters still glowed above Ansel's head. Poisoned Reynold Vale, 47 days ago. Aiden picked up the seal. It was cold and heavy. He bowed. Thank you for your generosity, Uncle. His voice was steady. His face was calm. Marvin stopped smirking. Something about Aiden's tone was off. Too calm, too steady. That's not how a broken boy talks. That's how a man with a plan talks. But Marvin brushed the thought aside. What kind of plan could Baron Nothing possibly have? The council meeting ended an hour later. Aiden left the hall. In the hallway, a servant caught up with him and reported that a carriage to Westmarch would be ready by evening. Quickly, he was being thrown out of the house that very day. Aiden nodded and went to his room to pack his things. He didn't have much. 3 shirts, 2 doublets, some old books, ink and quills. Everything fit into a single trunk. He sat down on the bed and closed his eyes. A map appeared in his mind's eye. Not a map of this world, a map from a past life. A map of an oil field in the Permian Basin that his company had written off as barren. Back then, he'd spotted an anomaly in the satellite images, a layer of oil-bearing sandstone 2 kilometers deep. The company had sold the plot for next to nothing. A year later, the buyer was producing 40,000 barrels a day there. The dead asset turned out to be a gold mine. All it took was looking deeper. Westmarch, the marshes, the plague, 217 souls. Everyone sees a dead asset, a written-off province, a blank line on the family's balance sheet. But Aiden now has something no one else in this world possesses. He sees deeper. The carriage left the estate gates at sunset. No one came out to say goodbye. Not a single servant, not a single relative. Aiden sat on a hard bench and looked out the window. The road headed north. Forests gave way to fields. Fields gave way to wastelands. The air grew damp. By morning of the second day, the carriage came to a stop. The coachman said there was no road beyond this point, only a trail. Aiden stepped out. Before him stood a crooked wooden signpost. Westmarch, 700 souls. The word had been written and then crossed out. Next to it, someone had scratched another number into the wood with a knife. 214. Aiden jumped down from the carriage step right into the mud. His boots sank up to his ankles. The village lay before him. 17 houses. Smoke rose from 4 chimneys. The rest stood dark. The roofs had caved in. The fences had rotted away. Children peered out from behind the wattle fences. Their eyes were like those of old dogs, not children's eyes. And at that moment, the system came to life. A line hovered over every house, over every tree, over every puddle, above every stone. Clay, kaolin, 94% purity, reserves of 12,000 metric tons. Aiden stared at that line. In his former world, the Chinese paid $380 per metric ton for kaolin like this. Compressed peat, 200,000 metric tons. Heat value, 4,500 kilocalories per kilogram. Aquifer, depth 8 meters. Flow rate, 40 liters per minute. Potable. He'd been exiled here to die. Someone had done their homework very poorly. An old man emerged from the nearest house, thin, hunchbacked. His clothes were patched in 10 places. He walked slowly toward Aiden. Lines lit up above his head. Graham Holt, age 61, Westmarch village headman. Agriculture, 42 out of 100. Administration, 29 out of 100. Hidden secret, hides 4 sacks of grain in the cellar. Reason, he's afraid the new baron will take it away. Loyalty to Aiden, 3 out of 100. The village head bowed without looking up. He was waiting for orders. He was waiting for the new baron to demand food, or money, or both. Every baron before him had started exactly like this. Aiden looked at the old man. Then he looked at the line above his head. 4 sacks of grain. That was probably all that stood between this village and starvation. Mr. Holt, keep the grain for yourself. I need something else. Show me where your most rotten swamp is. The village headman looked up for the first time. There was something new in his eyes. Not hope. It was far from hope, but surprise. A tiny spark of surprise in the eyes of a man who had long since stopped being surprised. A number flashed above his head. Loyalty 3, then 4. 1 point. Almost nothing. But Aiden smiled. In his past life, he'd seen companies take off from scratch, from a single contract, from a single right decision. It all starts with 1. The village headman led him along the path through the village. The mud squelched under his boots. The air smelled of rot and dampness. Aiden walked and looked around. The system ran non-stop. Labels hung above every house. Roof, straw, condition 12 out of 100, leaks in 3 places. Wall, unfired clay, structural crack, collapse within 2 years. Foundation, missing. He counted. 17 houses, 13 required repairs within a year. 4 could be left alone for another 2 years. 3 were already uninhabitable, but people lived in them anyway. The village head walked in silence. Peasants came out of their houses and watched. Aiden felt their gazes on his back. Above everyone who came into view, lines of text appeared. Woman by the well, Martha Finn, 34 years old, weaving 38 out of 100. Hidden secret, ill, coughing up blood for the 3rd month. Loyalty 2. Boy on the fence, Toby Green, 11 years old. Potential, arithmetic, hidden S-rank talent, undisclosed. Loyalty 1. Aiden stopped. He reread the line above the boy. Arithmetic, S-rank. In a village of 17 houses, in a rotten swamp on the edge of the kingdom, sitting there was an 11-year-old kid with potential that half the kingdom's accountants couldn't even dream of, and no one knew about it. No one had even thought to check. He walked on. The path led north. The trees grew shorter. The ground grew softer. The smell grew stronger. Half an hour later, they came out to the swamp. Rotten Pleas. That's what the village elder called it. Wide, black. The surface of the water glistened with an oily film. The reeds stood waist-high. Half-rotten planks lay on the shore. Someone had once tried to build footbridges, then given up. The village head stopped 10 paces from the water. He didn't want to get any closer. Aiden understood why. 6 people had drowned here in the past 10 years. The villagers considered this place cursed. Above the water, the system displayed the information. Compressed peat, 200,000 metric tons. Calorific value, 4,500 kilocalories per kilogram. Beneath the layer of peat, a deposit of brown iron ore. Purity, 68%. Depth, 4 meters. Depth of deposit, 2 meters. Estimated reserves, approximately 900 metric tons. 3 steps to the left. Object in the ground. Ankvald blade. Pre-division era. Depth, 40 centimeters. Condition, preserved by the peat environment. Preservation rating, 91 out of 100. Estimated value, 8,000 gold pieces. A crowd had gathered behind Aiden. 9 people. They'd come to see what the new Baron would do with the swamp. Everyone was expecting the same thing. The Baron would order them to drain it. By hand. With their bare hands. Without tools. Without a plan. And someone would drown. That's what happened under the last Baron. He ordered them to dig a ditch. 2 drowned on the very first day. They abandoned the ditch. Aiden picked up a rotten stick from the ground. He took 3 steps to the left. He thrust the stick into the mud on the bank. Dig here, carefully, 1/2 meter deep. No deeper. The village head looked at him. In the old man's eyes was that expression Aiden had seen hundreds of times in his past life. It was the look middle managers gave when a consultant said something they didn't understand. A mixture of distrust and fear of making a mistake. But the village head waved his hand. A young farmer named Derek picked up a shovel. The system displayed a line above him. Derek Moss, 23 years old. Strength, 67 out of 100. Digging, 51 out of 100. Hidden talent, construction. A-rank potential. Loyalty, 2. Derek began to dig. The shovel sank into the black sludge with a wet squelch. The peat was dense, heavy. It smelled of earth and something metallic. 15 minutes in, Derek straightened up and wiped his forehead. At 20 minutes, he dug deeper. At 30 minutes, the shovel clinked against metal. Derek froze. He looked at Aiden. He looked at the shovel. He dug again. The clang repeated. Clear, ringing, metal. Aiden crouched down. Keep going, carefully, with your hands. Derek dropped to his knees in the mud and began to dig through the peat with his fingers. 5 minutes later, an edge emerged from the black sludge. Dark metal. A straight line. Derek pulled. A blade slowly emerged from the bog, long, straight, blackened by the peat water, but completely intact. There was a coat of arms on the hilt, a shield with 2 crossed lightning bolts. The coat of arms of House Ankwald. Derek held the sword with both hands and couldn't say a word. His mouth hung open. His eyes were huge. He stared at the blade like a man who had found a god in a ditch. Behind Aiden, someone gasped. Then it grew quiet. Elder Holt took a step forward, then another. Then his knees buckled and he sat down right in the mud. He didn't fall, he sat down, slowly, like a man whose legs had given out. A line flashed above his head. Loyalty 3, 14, 27, plus 14 insight points. 9 witnesses. Shock multiplier 3 times. The system issued a message. An S-rank artifact detected. Plus 200 insight points. Accumulated points 264. Level up available. Gaze level 1, 2. Function unlocked. Night vision. Scan depth increased from 30 to 60 meters. Aiden took the blade from Derek's hands. The sword was heavy, a true battle blade, not decorative, not ceremonial. A weapon used to kill. He wiped the blade on the hem of his cloak. The steel glinted. Even beneath a layer of peat-black grime, it was clear that the blade was flawless. The peat had preserved it better than any weaponsmith. 9 men stood on the shore of Rotten Pool and looked at their new baron, an 18-year-old boy who was taller from the carriage last night, who hadn't demanded food, who hadn't demanded money, who had told the village headman to keep the grain for himself, and who had just poked a stick into the swamp and pulled out a sword worth more than the entire village, land, people, and livestock combined. The village headman sat in the mud, looking up at him. There was no longer doubt. There was something else. Something like a beginning. Aiden thrust the blade into the ground beside him. "And now, Mr. Holt," he said, "show me where your poorest family lives. I have work for them that pays real money." The village headman stood up. His knees were shaking, but he stood up, and he led Aiden back to the village. The Brodens turned out to be the poorest family. A mother, 3 children. Their father had drowned in Rotten Pool 4 years ago. They lived in a house that the system rated a 6 out of 100. The walls were crumbling, the roof leaked, the floor was dirt. The mother's name was Elsa, 31 years old. She looked 50. Above her head, the system displayed Elsa Broden, 31 years old. Weaving, 22 out of 100. Cooking, 35 out of 100. Hidden secret. Hasn't eaten in 3 days. Gives her food to the children. Loyalty 0. 0. Not even a 1. This woman didn't believe in anything at all. Aiden crouched down in front of her. He looked her in the eyes and said he needed workers, that he paid in silver, real silver, for cutting peat. The work was hard, but he paid every evening, not just once a month, not once a week. Every evening, in cash. No delays. Elsa looked at him and didn't believe him. She saw a boy in a dirty cloak standing before her. Where would he get silver? He's lying. All the barons lie. Aiden took a coin out of his pocket. He placed it on the table in front of her. A silver thaler bearing the royal coat of arms. "This is a down payment. For the first day. Come to the swamp at dawn tomorrow with a knife and a rope. I'll show you how to cut peat." Elsa looked at the coin, then at Aiden, then at the coin again. Her hand twitched, but she didn't take it. She was afraid it was a test. What if she took it and got punished? Aiden stood up and walked toward the door. The coin remained on the table. At the threshold, he turned around. "Mrs. Broden, take the coin. Buy some bread for the children. This isn't a test." He left. A sound came from behind him. Quiet, barely audible. Elsa Broden was crying. The system flashed. Elsa Broden's loyalty, 0.8. +3 insight points. Aidan stood on the porch of the dilapidated house and looked out at the village. 17 houses, 214 people, 180 days until the reassessment. He didn't know about that deadline yet, but he knew something else. Beneath this filth lay a fortune. Kaolin, peat, iron ore. He saw the numbers. He saw the reserves. He saw the potential. In his past life, he would have written a report, a polished one, with charts, with projections. He would have sent it by email and forgotten about it. But here, a report wouldn't help. Here, he needed hands. Living hands. The hands of people who didn't trust him. Loyalty, 0 to 27. Those were his starting numbers. In the corporate world, this was called a toxic asset. All metrics in the red. All indicators below 0. But Daniel Cho had built his career on toxic assets. The morning began with Pete. Aidan went out to the swamp at dawn. Elsa Broden stood at the water's edge, with a knife and a rope, just as he'd said. Derek Moss stood nearby, and 4 others. The system displayed their names and numbers, all with loyalty scores below 10. None of them came because they believed. They came for the silver. Aidan didn't take offense. In his past life, he'd seen how motivation worked. First, money, then habit, then trust, then loyalty. Each stage takes time. You can't rush it. He demonstrated how to cut peat. In his past life, he'd read about it in a report on Irish peat bogs. Long blocks, clean cuts, dried in the open air. Peat burns long and hot, better than firewood, cheaper than coal. And there were 200,000 metric tons of it here. They worked in silence. Aidan worked alongside them. His body was weak, but he didn't stop. By noon, his hands were burning. His back ached. His knees were shaking. But he cut peat just as well as everyone else. The system showed health 31 out of 100. Stamina 8 out of 100. Critical fatigue in 2 hours. He ignored those numbers. In the corporate world, there was a principle. A leader who isn't willing to do what he demands of his subordinates doesn't deserve respect. By the evening of the first day, they had cut 3 cartloads of peat. Aidan took out his wallet. He counted out the silver into each person's hands, personally, calling them by name. Mrs. Broden, here's your silver. Derek, here's yours. Ran, yours. Each time he looked the person in the eye. Each time he said their name. It was important. In a world where peasants were paid once a season and often cheated, daily pay in front of everyone was something unheard of. The system recorded it. Elsa's loyalty, 8.12. Derek's loyalty, 2.9. Total increase in insight points, 7. Small numbers, but steady. On the second day, 12 people showed up. On the third, 16. On the fourth, the morning began not with Pete, but with a crash. Aidan was sitting in the foreman's office counting supplies when the front door flew off its hinges. A girl stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered. Her red hair was pulled back with a leather strap, hands like a blacksmith's. Because she was a blacksmith. In her right hand, she held a hammer, not a small one, a battle hammer. Lines lit up above her head. Kyra Dan, 19 years old. Blacksmithing 72 out of 100. Strength 74 out of 100. Hidden talent, metallurgy. S-rank potential, undisclosed. A hidden secret. Her father is not her real father. Her real father is a legendary blacksmith trader who fled the royal armory with the secret of singing steel. Loyalty, 5 out of 100. Kyra walked toward him across the room, and the hammer in her hand was no prop. She was going to hit him. She shouted that she knew why he was here. The new Baron. He'd come to take the forge, just like the last one. The last Baron took half of her father's tools and didn't pay. Her father worked for 3 years on credit. He worked himself to death. He died. The forge stands closed, and now this kid with a seal has come to take the rest. Aidan didn't move. He sat at the table. Papers lay in front of him. He looked at the girl with the hammer and thought about how, in his past life, The most dangerous moment of his career had been an enraged vice president who'd thrown a stapler at him. A hammer was more serious than a stapler, but the principle was the same. When a person comes armed, they expect one of two things. Either you'll be scared and back down, or you respond with force. There's a third option. You do something they don't expect. Aiden slowly pulled out a desk drawer. He took out a sheet of parchment, laid it in front of him, picked up a quill, wrote a few lines, signed it, affixed the Westmarch seal, and slid the parchment toward the edge of the table. He turned toward Kyra. She stopped. The hammer hung in the air. She looked at the parchment. "What is this?" Aiden said it was a deed of gift. The forge becomes her sole property. The tools, the horn, the anvil, everything inside. From this day forward and forever. No Baron of Westmarch has the right to take the smithy from her without her consent. The Baron's seal, his signature. Kyra stood with her hammer raised, motionless. Her eyes darted from the parchment to Aiden's face. She didn't understand. This didn't fit into any pattern she knew. Barons don't give gifts. Barons take. She lowered the hammer. Slowly. She set it down on the floor. She picked up the parchment with both hands. She read it. She read it again. Her hands were trembling. She looked up. Why? Aiden said he needed a blacksmith. The best blacksmith he could get. The system shows that her potential in metallurgy is S rank. Of course, he didn't mention the system. He said he could tell by her hands, by the way she holds the hammer, by the tools in the forge he'd examined yesterday. Her father was good. She'll be better. But he doesn't need a blacksmith who works under duress. He needs a blacksmith who works because the forge is his. Kyra stood in the middle of the room with the parchment in her hands, silently cursing. 10 minutes. Aiden had counted the time. She was cursing creatively and with feeling. Then she sat down at the table across from him and said she wanted to eat. He pushed a bowl of porridge toward her. She ate greedily, enough for 3 people. The system updated the data. Kyra's loyalty, 5. 20. A 15-point jump. Shock multiplier, 4 times, plus 42 insight points. Kyra finished her porridge. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and said she still had some jelly left in the forge, enough for 20 horseshoes left in her forge. If the Baron needed something more substantial, he should find her some ore. Aiden smiled. He wouldn't have any trouble with the ore. An hour later, he was standing with Kyra by the swamp. He showed her a line that, of course, only he could see. Beneath a layer of peat, 4 meters deep, lay a seam of brown iron ore. 68% purity. 900 metric tons. He said he knew where the iron was, that he'd show her the spot, that they'd need people to mine it. Kyra stared at the swamp, unable to believe it. She asked how he knew. Aiden said his family had old maps. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Many old families kept geological records. Kyra nodded. She didn't press him for more details. She was interested in the iron, not its sources. A blacksmith's pragmatism. Upon returning to the village, Aiden discovered that news of the Ankwald sword had spread. All 214 residents already knew. The Baron had poked his staff into the swamp and pulled out a blade worth an entire estate. The story had grown rich with details. Some said the sword had leaped into his hands of its own accord. Some said there had been a light above the swamp. Some said the Baron spoke to the earth. Aiden Dan didn't deny it. Rumors are currency. Free, powerful, uncontrollable but useful if left alone. By the evening of the 4th day, he had a work crew of 20 people out on the peat bog. A blacksmith with his own forge and a willingness to work. A village headman who was beginning to believe. And an 11-year-old boy named Toby Green with S-rank potential in arithmetic, a talent he hadn't tapped into yet. It was too early. He needed to earn the family's trust first. On the 5th day, the first merchant arrived. The system had detected him a day before his arrival. A traveling merchant. Above his figure on the horizon, lines had lit up even while he was still 2 hours away. Hank Orlovsky, 41 years old. Trade, 63 out of 100. Product rating, 55 out of 100. Hidden secret. Buys cheaply from impoverished provinces and resells at triple the price. Greed, 88 out of 100. Loyalty, 0. The perfect first customer. Greedy, so he'll come for cheap goods. Deceitful, so he'll try to cheat. But Aiden knew his numbers, knew his greed, knew his markup, and knew the market price of peat better than the merchant himself. The merchant arrived in a wagon. He looked at the peat. He grimaced. He said the goods were damp, that the price was 5 copper coins per cartload. Above his head, the system displayed actual market price, 2 gold coins per cartload. Resale markup, 300%. Aiden named his price, 2 gold coins per cartload, 20 cartloads, 40 gold pieces. The merchant laughed. Then he looked at Aiden more closely. The boy wasn't haggling. The boy had named the exact market price. How did the swamp baron know the market price of peat? The merchant tried to lower the offer. 1.5 gold pieces. Aiden shook his head. 2. Or he'd wait for the next merchant. The merchant looked at the peat again. The peat was good, dry, cut just right. He hadn't seen peat cut like this in the smaller provinces. Usually they cut it haphazardly. This peat was cut as if with a ruler. Even blocks, all the same size. The merchant agreed. 2 gold coins, 20 carts. 40 gold coins were placed on the table in front of Aiden. He counted each one. He examined each one closely. Not because he didn't trust the merchant. It was because 20 men were standing behind him, watching. They had to see that their baron wasn't a fool, that he knew the value of things, that he couldn't be cheated. The merchant left with 20 carts of peat. Aiden distributed the money. Each worker received 1 silver coin for every day of work. That came to 5 silver coins per person for 5 days. 20 people, 100 silver coins, 10 gold coins. 30 remained. Of those he set aside 10 for purchasing tools, 10 for food for the village, 10 as a reserve. He did these calculations out loud, in front of the village elder, in front of Kyra, in front of everyone who was listening. Open accounting. In the corporate world, this was called transparency. Here it was a miracle. No baron in the history of Westmarch had ever shown the peasants where the money was going. That evening the peasants ate meat, for the first time in 3 years. Before leaving, Aiden had bought half a bull's carcass from a merchant for 2 gold pieces. The meat was roasted over a communal fire in the center of the village. The children ate and laughed. The women ate and cried. The men ate and remained silent. The system recorded the data. Average loyalty in the village, 4.2, 11.7. A 7.5-point increase, plus 38 insight points. Total reserve, 351 points. Lyra Holt sat away from the fire and didn't eat. The village headman's granddaughter. 17 years old, the only literate person in the village. Aiden had noticed her on the very first day but hadn't approached her. The system displayed, Lyra Holt, 17 years old. Literacy, 61 out of 100. Score, 54 out of 100. Hidden talent, administration. A-rank potential. Hidden secret, her mother is not a peasant. Her real mother fled the royal harem while pregnant. Lyra is the illegitimate sister of the current crown prince. Loyalty, 8. Aiden approached her. He sat down next to her. She didn't look at him. He said he needed someone who could count, someone who could write, someone who would keep records. She asked why. He said he was going to pay people every day, and someone had to write down how much to whom and for what. Otherwise, in a month, he'd get confused. She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were filled with distrust. Harsh, hardened. The distrust of a person who had watched her younger brother die of the plague because there was no doctor, because they were poor, because nobody cared. She said she didn't believe a single word he said. He nodded. He said he wasn't asking her to believe him. He was asking her to count. Whether she believed him or not was her business. That's up to her. But the records are needed tomorrow. She was silent for a long time. Then she stood up and left. That night, Aiden lay in the dark and thought. 180 days. He hadn't known about that deadline yet. Lyra turned out to be better than he'd expected. In 3 days, she organized all the village heads' records. She rewrote them neatly. She sorted them by year. She tallied the results. Aiden looked at her work and saw the handwriting of a natural-born administrator. Neat columns, precise totals, not a single error in 20 years' worth of someone else's records. The system didn't lie. A-rank potential in administration. Untapped. Buried in the swamp. Like everything else in West March. On the 7th day, what he had both been waiting for and feared at the same time happened. A messenger, on horseback, with a document. The document was from the Vale family's chancery, an official notice. The great reassessment of the provinces of the Kingdom of Aurelia would begin in 173 days. The Guild of Royal Appraisers would conduct an inspection of all baronies. A rank below C means the province will be transferred to the treasury. The former owner loses his land title and voting rights. 173 days. Aiden stood with the paper in his hands and did the math. Rank C at a minimum. What does that mean? It means stone buildings. It means a functioning farm. It means a population of at least 500 souls. It means the province's income must be no less than 200 gold pieces a year. He had 214 souls. Income for the first week, 40 gold pieces. Not a single stone building. No school, no hospital, no garrison. By every measure, it was a death sentence. Rank F, write-off, total loss. But Aiden knew something that not a single official in the chancellery knew. Beneath that filth lay 200,000 metric tons of peat, 20,000 metric tons of kaolin, 900 metric tons of iron ore, and gold. He couldn't yet determine how much gold there was. He needed the 3rd level of vision. He was short on insight points, 351 out of the 500 required for the next upgrade. He hid the notice. He didn't tell anyone about the 173 days. It was too soon. Panic kills faster than the plague. Instead, he went to Kyra. The smithy stood on the eastern edge of the village, a stone building, the only stone building in Westmarch. The system showed smithy, Riverstone, built 80 years ago, condition 54 out of 100, forge operational, anvil operational, 60% of necessary tools in stock. Kyra was working. She was repairing shovels for the peat bogs. The hammer in her hands moved rhythmically and precisely. Every blow landed exactly where it should, not a single unnecessary movement. Aiden stood in the doorway and watched. S-rank potential in metallurgy. This wasn't just a number. It meant that this 19-year-old girl, with the right training and resources, could become the best blacksmith in the kingdom. Could become. That was the key word. The system showed potential, not a result. The result had to be created. Aiden stepped inside. Kyra didn't turn around. She knew he had come. He said he didn't need shovels. He needed a furnace, a big one, to smelt iron from ore. Kyra stopped swinging her hammer. She looked at him over her shoulder. She asked what kind of ore. He said brown iron ore, 68% purity, depth of occurrence 4 meters, under the swamp. Kyra set down her hammer. She turned fully toward him. Her expression was serious. She said that smelting iron ore required a temperature above 1,000 degrees. Her furnace reached 700, maybe 800 if the blast was working perfectly. That wasn't enough. She needed a different furnace, or a different method. Aiden nodded. He knew that. In his past life, he'd read about the Bessemer process, blowing air through molten cast iron. The temperature rises due to the oxidation of impurities. No additional fuel is needed. All that's needed is the right converter. He sat down on a barrel by the wall. He picked up a piece of charcoal and began to sketch on a piece of leather. A simple converter, pear-shaped, blowing holes at the bottom, clay lining. He drew and explained. Kyra listened, at first skeptically, then with interest, then with that expression Aiden had seen only in the best engineers in his past life. a hunger. The professional hunger of someone who had found a solution to a problem that had seemed unsolvable. She took the piece of charcoal from him. She began to revise the sketch. Here the wall needs to be thicker, or it'll burst from the heat. Here the holes need to be smaller, or the airflow will be uneven. Here a bevel is needed for slag drainage. Aiden watched and said nothing. She understood. She saw the design as a blacksmith would, not as a theorist. His drawing was correct in principle. Her corrections were correct in practice. Together they came up with something that worked. They worked until dark. When Kyra finished the final drawing of the converter, she looked at it for a long time. Then she asked where he had learned to do this. He said it was in his family's old books. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. Something else was more important to her. When do we start? Tomorrow. She nodded, and for the first time, she smiled. On the way back to the village, Aiden thought about the numbers. Kaolin, 12,000 metric tons here, 8,000 metric tons further south. A total reserve of 20,000 metric tons. In the past world, kaolin was used for porcelain, for paper, for ceramics. Here, porcelain was a luxury. It was brought in from the southern kingdoms. The price per unit was 10 times higher than that of ordinary clay tableware. If he could find a craftsman skilled in working with kaolin, Westmarch would be able to produce porcelain, the only province to the north with its own porcelain production. A monopoly. But that required people. More people. 214 people were not enough. He needed at least 500 for a C rank, ideally 700 for a B rank. Where to find people? He couldn't force them. He couldn't buy them. He could only attract them. Rumors. The rumors were already spreading. Merchant Hank Orlovsky had left with 20 carts of peat and a story about a baron who pulls swords out of the swamp. This story will spread along the roads, through the markets, in the taverns. People will hear it. Someone will come. But that's not enough. And at that moment, the system displayed a message. Recruit lottery, condition met. One person's loyalty has exceeded the 50 threshold. Verification. Graham Holt, loyalty 52. Summoning scroll available. A random talented person within a 3-day journey's radius will receive a nudge from fate to come to Westmarch. Aiden stopped in the middle of the trail. The village elder's loyalty, 52. He hadn't noticed when it had risen. Apparently, it happened tonight. Maybe when he was paying people. Maybe when he was going over the accounts openly. Maybe when he was buying meat for the communal bonfire. Little things, but they add up. Summoning scroll. He activated it mentally. The system displayed a silhouette, a woman. 2 days' journey to the south, moving north. Name, no questions. Profession, healing. Potential, A rank. A healer, heading for Westmarch, without even knowing it. 2 days. In 2 days, he'll have a doctor, or something like a doctor, in a province where the last healer died 8 years ago from the very plague he was treating. Aiden kept walking. His legs ached. His back throbbed. His hands were worn down from peat and coal. An 18-year-old boy's body wasn't built for this kind of work, but it was getting used to it. His health had risen from 31 to 34 in a week, slowly. Myrene entered the village in silence. She didn't bow. She didn't introduce herself. She walked over to the well. She drew some water. She drank. She wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her robe, and only then did she look at the people who were staring at her. She was short, thin. Her dark hair was tucked under a gray scarf. Her hands were red from work. Her eyes were calm and heavy, the eyes of someone who had seen too many deaths and had stopped flinching at them. The village elder approached her first. He asked who she was and where she was from. Myrene said she was coming from the monastery of St. Agnes, that the convent had expelled her, that she was a healer, that she was looking for a place where she could work. Above her head, a line glowed that only Aiden could see. Expelled from the order for using pagan methods, hygiene, boiling, saved more lives than permitted by the charter. Aidan stepped out of the village elder's house. He approached her. The system displayed, Myrene O'Dale, 24 years old, healing 67 out of 100, loyalty 15. He said that Westmarch needed a healer, that the last healer had died 8 years ago, that since then, people had been treating themselves, with herbs, with prayers, or they hadn't sought treatment at all. Myrene looked at him, then at the village. 17 houses, mud, poverty. She asked if there was a room, if there were any tools, if there was at least clean water. Aidan said the room would be ready tomorrow. He'd order the tools. There was clean water, a well he'd ordered dug on the 3rd day, 10 meters deep. The system had detected an aquifer. The water was clean and safe to drink. Manhwa nodded, without a smile, without thanks, without unnecessary words. She simply nodded and asked where the patients were. There were many patients. Aidan knew this from the system. Martha Finn with a bloody cough. Old man Boren with a festering wound on his leg. 2 children with a fever. 5 more with chronic malnutrition, which the system classified as a pre-disease condition. Manhwa worked all day, without a break. She examined each one. She touched their foreheads. She listened to their breathing. She sniffed their wounds. Her methods were strange to this world. She washed her hands before each patient. She boiled water. She used clean rags. Things that were obvious to someone from Daniel Cho's world. Things that were heretical in the world of the Kingdom of Aurelia. That was why she'd been expelled from the monastery. For washing her hands. For boiling water. For saving people in a way not approved by the charter. Aidan stood to the side and watched. He thought about how this world was organized. 13 assessors for the entire kingdom. Bought. Corrupt. A monopoly on knowledge. A monopoly on judgment. A monopoly on the truth. And at the same time, monasteries where a healer is expelled for washing her hands. Knowledge here was currency. Dangerous currency. Anyone who knew too much or knew what was not permitted became a threat. His system was a threat. His knowledge from a past life was a threat. Myrene, with her boiling potions, was a threat. They were all heretics in a world that preferred to remain blind. By evening, Myrene had examined 32 people. 9 needed immediate treatment. In Martha Finn's case, she diagnosed not consumption, but an inflammation caused by dampness. Curable if there was dry shelter and herbs. For the old Boren, she cleaned the wound and applied a bandage with honey, a primitive antiseptic, but one that worked. She gave the children with fevers a decoction of willow bark. In Daniel Cho's world, it was called aspirin. Here, it was called witchcraft. But Myrene didn't care about names. Results were what mattered to her. At night, Aidan sat in his room and thought. He needed a space for Myrene, a real one, made of stone, with a roof that doesn't leak, with a floor you can wash, with windows that let in light. Westmarch's first stone building since the blacksmith shop. A clinic. He remembered the foundation. The old granite foundation on the eastern outskirts. The system had shown it to him on the very first night. Someone had been building a stone house here a long time ago. They'd abandoned it, but the foundation remained. Strong, sturdy. It could be used. He needed stones. He needed mortar. He needed hands. In the morning, he gathered the people. 20 peat cutters, 5 iron ore miners, Kyra, Lyra, Derek. He explained the plan. We'll keep cutting peat. We'll keep mining iron ore. But at the same time, we'll build a structure on the old foundation. A clinic. A hospital. For everyone. Free of charge. Derek asked where to get the stone. Aidan pointed to the hill to the north. The system showed it. Limestone coming to the surface. A 3-meter thick layer. Quality 71 out of 100. Suitable for construction. All we need to do is break it up and hew it. No quarry needed. Just a pickaxe and patience. Work got underway. Aidan organized 3 shifts. Mornings, peat. Afternoons, iron ore and stone. Evening, construction. He drew up a schedule. Lyra took notes. Everyone knew what they were doing. Every hour was accounted for. In his past life, Daniel Cho had managed projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Here, the scale was different. 214 people, 30 of them were able to work. The budget was 30 gold pieces. But the principles were the same: planning, resource allocation, control, accountability. Mayreen worked every day. She arrived at dawn and left after sunset. The sick came to her in a steady stream. Not just from the village, 3 came from nearby farmsteads. Word had spread. There's a healer in Westmarch, a real one who heals, one who doesn't take your last penny. On the 3rd day after her arrival, Aiden ordered a set of lenses from an itinerant glassmaker. The glassmaker was passing by on his way north. The system flagged him within half a day. Master Gerhard, 53 years old, glasswork, 77 out of 100, lenses, 64 out of 100. Hidden talent, optics, B-rank potential. Loyalty, 0. He was only interested in money. Aiden paid in advance, 2 gold pieces for a set of lenses based on his drawing. The drawing was simple: 2 convex lenses in a tube. A microscope. Primitive, but it worked. In Daniel Cho's world, the microscope was invented in the 17th century. A simple design, 2 lenses, 30 times magnification. Enough to see bacteria. Enough to change medicine. The glassmaker didn't understand why, but he accepted the order. Money is money. The lenses would be ready in 5 days. Manhwa didn't know about the microscope. Not yet, anyway. Aiden was waiting for the right moment. In the corporate world, he'd learned one thing: a gift given too early is a bribe. A gift given at the right time is an investment. On the 17th day, what he'd feared from day 1 happened. A child fell ill. Seriously ill. Derek Moss's daughter. 4 years old. A high fever. Convulsions. Manhwa examined her and turned pale. Swamp fever. Here, that was a death sentence. 3 out of 4 who contracted it died. There was no cure. Officially. Manhwa knew otherwise. The bark of the hin tree. It grows in the southern forests, a 3-day journey from here. She had a little in her knapsack, a supply she'd been carrying with her, enough for a single dose. She gave the child a decoction of the bark. The fever broke. The convulsions stopped. By morning, the girl was breathing steadily. By evening, she opened her eyes. Derek knelt before Mayreen, unable to speak. His wife wept silently, holding their daughter close. Above Derek's head, the system displayed Loyalty 9.48, a jump of 39 points. Above Mayreen's head, Loyalty 15.42, plus 87 insight points. Total reserve 497 out of 500. 3 points. He was 3 points short of the 3rd level. Aiden stood by the door and watched as Mayreen stroked the child's head. The girl was smiling. Weakly, but she was smiling. Mayreen looked up. She looked at Aiden and said 2 words. "Who are you?" Not "Who are you, my lord?" Not "Who are you, Baron?" Just "Who are you?" As if she were asking not about a name or a title, but about something else. About that didn't fit into her understanding of the world. An 18-year-old baron of a marshy province, who knows about clean water, who is building a clinic, who orders lenses from a glassmaker, who brought her here. She didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in reasons, and the reason standing before her didn't look like an 18-year-old boy. Aiden didn't answer. He smiled and walked out. Behind him, Kyra ran into the room. Dirty, sweaty, excited. She was shouting that the converter was ready, that she'd put it together in a day, that they had to try it, now, immediately. Mayreen watched him go through the doorway. Her question hung in the air, unanswered. "Who are you?" Kyra was dragging him toward the forge. The converter stood in the courtyard, pear-shaped, clay lining, blast holes, exactly as per the blueprints, with Kyra's modifications. She loaded the ore, lit the fire. She began to blow air into it. The temperature rose. The converter's clay glowed red. The ore inside melted. Slag flowed out through the bottom opening, black, thick, foul-smelling. Kyra didn't move away. She controlled the blast. She added ore. She monitored the temperature. Her face was red from the heat. Sweat trickled down her forehead and sizzled on her leather apron. 3 hours later, she stopped the process. She opened the converter. Inside lay a lump of metal, red hot, orange. She pulled it out with tongs. She placed it on the anvil. She picked up the hammer, and she struck. The sound was clear, ringing, not the dull thud of shoddy iron, the clear ring of good steel. Kyra struck again, and again. The metal yielded. It was soft, malleable, obedient. She worked for an hour, 2, 3. She hammered and hammered. A shape began to emerge from the shapeless lump. A blade. Not a long one, not a battle blade. A work knife. The first blade forged from Westmarch iron in a Westmarch converter by the hands of a Westmarch blacksmith. When she finished, she laid the knife on the anvil. She looked at it. Then she took a small branding iron, heated it, and pressed it into the base of the blade. Her name. Kyra. The first brand in the province's history. She stood before the anvil and said nothing. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Her father had died believing she was a disgrace, that a woman couldn't be a blacksmith, that he'd dreamed of a son. Her whole life she'd been proving to a dead man that he was wrong. And now, the first blade, her name on the steel, her forge, her metal. She turned to Aiden. She picked up the knife from the anvil and silently placed it in his hands. It wasn't a gift, it was an oath. The system has been updated. Kyra's loyalty, 28. 51 plus 64 insight points. Total reserve, 561. Threshold of 500 passed. Upgrade available. Gaze level 2. 3. Unlocked. Scan depth 120 meters. New feature. Economist's gaze. Resource income calculation. Trade route forecasting. Real-time market value assessment. And a new entry. Alluvial gold to the southeast. Depth 55 meters. Purity 87%. Reserves 14 metric tons. 14 metric tons of gold beneath that swamp. Aiden stood in the smithy, holding Kyra's knife. Behind him stood the girl who had just silently sworn an oath to him. Before him were numbers that made his head spin. 14 metric tons of gold at current prices in the Kingdom of Aurelia is roughly 280,000 gold coins. The morning of the 21st day began with rain. Light rain. Cold rain. The kind that doesn't stop for days on end. Aiden stood under the awning by the village headman's house and looked out at the village. It had changed over the past 3 weeks. Not drastically, but noticeably. Neat rows of peat blocks lay out to dry by the swamp. Smoke was already rising from 7 chimneys instead of 4. A pile of ore was heaped up by Kyra's smithy. Lyra sat at a table inside, scratching away with her quill. 30 people worked every day. The clinic, built on the old foundation, had risen by 1.5 meters. The walls were made of hewn limestone. The mortar was a mixture of clay and sand, rough but sturdy. Meyrin came every morning to look at the construction site and nodded silently. She didn't say thank you. She healed. That was better than any thank you. The system showed progress. Population, 214. Average loyalty, 24.3. Insight points, 612. Income over 3 weeks, 78 gold. Expenses, 52 gold. Reserve, 26 gold. The numbers were small, but positive. In the corporate world, this was called breaking even, the first sign of viability. On the 23rd day, the first settlers arrived. A family of 4, a husband, a wife, and 2 children. They were coming from the south. Bandits had burned down their village. The system displayed the details. Thomas Kerr, 29 years old. Carpentry skill, 56 out of 100. Construction, 48 out of 100. Hidden talent, architecture. B rank potential. Loyalty, 0. Carpenter, builder, with the potential of an architect. Aiden met him at the village gate. There was no gate, just a spot where the path ran between the two houses on either end. But Aiden stood there and waited. He knew they would come. The system had spotted them the day before. Thomas Kerr stood before him, wet, dirty, and hungry. His wife was holding their youngest child close. The older boy, about 7 years old, looked up at Aiden. A line glowed above the boy. Ron Kerr, 7 years old. Hidden talent, assessment, potential, S rank, undisclosed. Aiden reread the line, then again. Assessment, S rank. A 7-year-old boy from a burned-down village carried within him the potential to become a top-rank evaluator, one of only 13 in the entire kingdom. And all of them had been bought off. Aiden crouched down in front of Thomas. He said there was work in Westmarch, there was food, there's a roof over his head. A carpenter would find work here for years to come. Paid in silver, every evening. Thomas looked at him and couldn't believe it. He'd been walking along the road for 3 days and every village had chased him away. Extra mouths to feed, outsiders, bandit scum. And here, a boy baron was offering work and food. He nodded, silently. He had no words. The system recorded it. Thomas Kerr's loyalty, 0.12. Westmarch's population, 214.218. 4 people. A drop in the bucket, but drops turn into streams. Over the next week, 11 more people arrived. Refugees, vagabonds, homeless people. The rumor of the swamp baron, who pays in silver and doesn't cheat, spread along the roads like smoke, slowly but unstoppably. Among them was an old man named Oswald Tin, 63 years old, a former teacher from a province that had been written off during the last reassessment 30 years ago. The system showed Oswald Tin, 63 years old, teaching 71 out of 100, history 64 out of 100, literacy 79 out of 100, hidden talent, mentoring, A-rank potential, loyalty 3, teacher. In a village where no child except Lyra could read, Aiden sat him down by the campfire that evening and they talked for 3 hours. Oswald told him how his province had been written off, how people from the treasury came and took the land, how the peasants were sold off to settle debts, how he fled with a knapsack and 2 books. 30 years of wandering, 30 years without a home. Aiden listened and thought, this is what F rank means. This is what awaits Westmarch if he fails the reevaluation. Not an abstract threat, a concrete one. With the face of a 63-year-old who had everything taken from him 30 years ago. He offered Oswald a position, teacher at Westmarch, the first school, for all the children of the province. Oswald looked at him for a long time. Then he asked if he was serious. Aiden said he couldn't be more serious. Literate people are worth more than gold. He knew this from his past life. A corporation without trained employees is just a building. A province without literate people is just mud. Oswald agreed. Loyalty 3, 18. On the 3rd day, Aiden assembled his team. Not the whole village, a team. Lyra, Kyra, Mayrin, Derek, Thomas, Oswald. 6 people. He laid out the papers in front of them. Lyra got her notebook ready. He explained the reevaluation. 150 days, rank C minimum. What does that mean in numbers? A population of at least 500 souls. Provincial revenue of at least 200 gold pieces per year. At least 3 stone buildings. A functioning economy with 3 sectors. The presence of a garrison. The presence of a school or a church. Lyra took notes. Her pen scratched across the paper. They had 229 souls. They needed 271 more. Income, 78 gold per month. Extrapolated to a year, 936 gold. That's enough. 1 stone building, a blacksmith shop. The clinic will be ready in a month. They need at least 1 more. 3 industries. They have peat. Metallurgy is getting started. They need a 3rd. Kaolin, porcelain, or ceramics. A garrison. 0 swords. A school. They have Oswald, but no building. He looked at the faces of his people. Kyra was clenching her fists. Mayrin was silent. Lyra was counting. Derek frowned. Thomas was thinking. Oswald shook his head. Kyra spoke first. She said that 150 days wasn't enough, that they wouldn't make it in time, that a miracle was needed. Aiden shook his head. Not a miracle, a plan. He unfolded the map of Westmarch that he'd been drawing every night based on data from the system. Every resource was marked, every aquifer, every stone outcrop, every peat bog, every ore deposit. He hadn't marked the gold. It's too early. He pointed to 3 spots on the map. First, southern kaolin, 8,000 metric tons. This is where the workshop will be. Second, northern hill, limestone outcrop. This is where the quarry will be, stone for construction. Third, the eastern bank of the river. This is where the dock will be. The river leads to a trade route, our own trade route. No middlemen, no Velguard duties. Lyra looked up from her papers. She said the Velguards control the overland route. But the river doesn't flow through their lands. The river flows through Crown lands. The Crown route. The Crown's duty is 5%. The Velguard's duty is 30%. The difference is enormous. If Westmarch starts transporting goods down the river, the Velguards will lose revenue. And they won't let that happen. Aiden nodded. He knew that. The Velguards would be a problem. But not right now. Right now, they needed to build. In a week, they could think about the river. In a month, about the Velguards. In 3 months, about the garrison. Each task in its own time. Mayrin asked one thing. She asked how he knew where everything was located on ground. She asked it calmly, without accusation, without suspicion. She simply asked. Everyone looked at Aiden. He replied that his clan had old records, geological maps. The Vale's ancestors had studied their lands long before Westmarch became a cursed place. A lie, a smooth one, a plausible one. Mayrin nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. She would remember that question. She would come back to it. Aiden could see that. On the 35th day, an event occurred that he hadn't foreseen. Not even the system had warned of it. Because the threat didn't come from outside. It came from within. A peasant named Victor Lowe, 41 years old. Loyalty, 7 out of 100. The lowest in the village after a month on the job. The system showed it. Victor Lowe, 41 years old. Farming, 33 out of 100. Hidden secret. Receives silver from someone outside Westmarch. Regularly. Once a week. Aiden had noticed this as early as the 2nd week. The secret would flash red every time Victor came into view. But he didn't act. He waited. In the corporate world, he'd learned not to touch a mole until he knew who its master was. Victor was someone's eyes and ears in Westmarch. Whose? His uncle's? His cousins? The Velguards? One of them. Or all of them at once. On the 35th day, Victor disappeared. He was there in the morning. By noon, he was gone. He didn't tell anyone. The system showed his receding figure to the south. Direction, Clear Meadows. Cousin Marvin's province. Aiden stood at the edge of the village and watched the speck on the horizon fade away. Victor was carrying information. About peat, about iron, about the smithy, about people, about money, about everything Aiden had built in a month. And in a few days, that information would land on Marvin Vale's desk. His 22-year-old cousin with a prosperous province and a debt of 600 gold pieces to a loan shark. A cousin who was already furious that some swamp-dwelling nobody had been given anything at all. And now he'd find out that this swamp-dwelling nobody was trading peat and smelting iron. Aiden knew what would happen next. Marvin would strike. He wasn't smart, but he was angry. And he had money, or more accurately, debts. And people in debt do foolish things. The only question was when and how. Aiden went back to work. He couldn't stop Victor. He couldn't stop Marvin. All he could do was build faster. The clinic was taking shape. Every day, 3 more rows of stones. Thomas Kerr turned out to be a master. His hands read the stone the way Kyra read metal. He fitted the blocks so that half as much mortar was needed. The walls grew straight and strong. The system updated his data. Construction 48, 53. His potential was unfolding. Slowly, but it was unfolding. On the 42nd day, the glassmaker returned. With lenses. 2 convex lenses in a wooden tube. The peat was burning. The southern field. 4 weeks of drying. 200 cartloads of finished goods. 40 gold pieces at market value. Everything was burning. Aiden ran along the trail and saw the glow above the trees. Red, intense. A peat fire is not like a forest fire. Peat burns slowly and voraciously. The flames were low. The smoke was black, thick, poisonous, and trying to put it out with water was useless. Peat burns even underwater. He reached the field in 20 minutes. Half the village was already there. People were rushing about with buckets. It was useless. The water evaporated before it even reached the fire. Derek was in charge. He tried to organize a human chain, but the chain wasn't working. The fire was spreading outward. Aiden stopped. He looked at the field. The system displayed the temperature, the rate of spread, wind direction. He thought. In a past life, he'd read a report on a peat fire in Indonesia, 2015. It burned for 2 months. The only way to stop a peat fire is not to extinguish it, but to cut it off. Trenches. Deep ones. Down to the mineral soil. Fire won't spread across bare earth. He shouted, "Don't put it out, dig!" A trench around the fire, 2 meters wide, 1 meter deep, down to the clay. The people stopped. They looked at him. He stood before them, drenched in sweat and covered in soot. An 18-year-old boy, who was telling them to stop fighting the fire. Derek looked at him, then at the fire, then back at Aiden, and he picked up a shovel. He started digging. Kyra grabbed a second shovel. Thomas followed her. 5 others followed him. They dug like mad. Dirt flew in all directions. The trench grew. 0.5 meter, 1 meter, 1.5. Clay appeared at a depth of 1 meter. Yellow, dense. The fire reached the edge of the trench and stopped. Thick smoke billowed up. The fire licked at the edge, but it didn't cross over. The bare clay wouldn't burn. The trench was working. 2 hours later, the field was surrounded. The fire burned inside the perimeter, slowly, voraciously, but it didn't spread. By morning, it would burn itself out. Aiden sat on the edge of the ditch and watched the fire. 200 cartloads of peat, 40 gold pieces, a month's work. It was all gone. The system showed a loss of 42 gold pieces. Peat reserves for sale, 0. The next batch would be ready in 3 weeks. He did the math. It was a blow. Painful, but not fatal. Reserve, 26 gold. Income from iron would start in 2 weeks when Kyra forged the first batch of tools for sale. The kaolin workshop wasn't up and running yet. Resources were tight. The question was, who set the fire? He knew the answer, but knowledge isn't proof. The system showed traces. 2 people. They came from the south. At night. They brought oil. Doused the edge of the field. Set it ablaze. Left the same way they came. The tracks led toward Yasnia Lugovie, Marvin's province. Victor Lowe brought the information. Marvin hired people. A simple chain of events. Predictable, dull, and completely unpunished if one follows the rules of this world. According to the rules of this world, the response to arson is revenge. A sword, blood, a raid on another province, a nighttime massacre. Baron for baron, house for house. That's how it had worked here for 1,000 years. Aiden had no intention of playing by those rules. He intended to play by his own. In the morning, he summoned Lyra. She came with the papers. He dictated. She wrote, "An official complaint to the Chancellery of the Council of Barons. Subject, arson of property, Westmarch Province. Damages, 42 gold pieces. In detail, with calculations, with a description of every cartload of peat, with the market price indicated, with an interest rate for lost profits, with a forecast of losses from delayed deliveries." Lyra wrote and paused. She had never seen documents like these. No one in this world had ever seen such documents. Barons didn't file complaints with financial calculations. Barons filed complaints with threats. Aiden continued. Witness testimony. 4 peasants saw the fire. 2 saw shadows at the southern edge of the field. The suspect's direction of escape. South, toward clear meadows. A map, drawn by Lyra based on his description. Accurate, with distances, with markers. Then he called for Ivy, the mute girl they'd found in the swamp during the 5th week. She came to Westmarch on her own, 12 years old. She had escaped from slave traders. She was on her way to the Baron who pays real money. The rumor had even reached her. Aiden took her in on the very first day. He fed her, gave her a place by the hearth. Didn't touch her. Didn't ask questions, just let her be. The system showed Ivy, 12 years old. Cartography 81 out of 100. Observation 89 out of 100. Hidden talent, reconnaissance, S-rank potential. Hidden secret, the sole surviving witness to the murder of the traitorous appraisers in the guild's basements 10 years ago. She remembers every face. Loyalty 40 out of 100. High from day 1, because he fed her and didn't harm her. Ivy didn't speak, but she drew, on wax tablets, with breathtaking precision. Aiden gave her a piece of charcoal and a scrap of parchment. He asked her to draw what she had seen that night. She saw it. She always saw it. She had been sleeping by the window and woke up to the smell of smoke. And she saw 2 people in the southern field, their faces. Ivy drew for 10 minutes. When she finished, Aiden looked at the drawing. 2 faces, clear, recognizable. One with a scar on his chin, the other with a missing ear. The detail was such that anyone who knew these people would recognize them instantly. Aiden attached the drawing to the complaint. He sent everything by messenger to the Council of Barons. He paid the messenger 3 silver coins for speed. The Council of Barons met once a month. The next meeting was in 10 days. Aiden's complaint would be laid on the table before the 12 barons of the Northern District. Marvin would be among them. 10 days later, Aiden received a reply, not on paper, but by word of mouth. A merchant passing through told the village headman. Something unprecedented had happened at the Council of Barons meeting. The young Baron of Westmarch had filed a complaint, with figures, with calculations, with sketches of the arsonists' faces, with a map, with a financial analysis of the damage. On the 45th day, Westmarch surpassed the 240 soul mark. People kept coming, in pairs, in threes, sometimes in whole families. Rumors spread. The Baron who pays in silver every evening, the Baron who neither beats nor robs, the Baron who defeated another Baron with a piece of paper. In a world where peasants were treated like livestock, these rumors sounded like a fairy tale. But people kept coming, because the fairy tale was better than their reality. The clinic was completed by the 50th day. Thomas Kerr laid the final stone. A tiled roof that Kyra had fired from local clay. A stone floor, 2 windows with mica shutters. An oak door. A small building, 6 by 8 meters. But it was the second stone building in Westmarch, and the first one built from scratch in the last 40 years. Myrene stepped inside. She walked through the rooms. The operating room, a 4-bed ward. A storeroom for herbs and instruments. A small office, a table, a chair, a shelf. And on the shelf, her microscope. She stood in the middle of her hospital and said nothing. Then she turned to Aiden. Her eyes were dry, but something in them had changed. She no longer looked at him as if he were a boy. The system updated the data. Myrene's loyalty, 42, 56, plus 34 insight points. On the 55th day, Aiden launched the 3rd industry, kaolin. He found an elderly potter among the settlers named Ben Reed, 60 years old. Pottery, 65 out of 100. Hidden talent, ceramics. Potential, A-. But not porcelain. Porcelain required knowledge that Ben didn't have, knowledge that no one in the northern provinces possessed. Porcelain was imported from the south and cost more than silver. Aiden knew the technique from his past life, kaolin plus feldspar plus quartz, firing at 1,300 degrees. Kyra's converter reached 1,100, 200 degrees short. He needed a different kiln, a special one, with double walls, with a draft, with temperature control. He drew up a blueprint, a simple updraft kiln, fire at the bottom, firing chamber at the top. Hot air rises and creates even heat. Thomas built the kiln in a week. Ben loaded the first batch of kaolin. The firing lasted 12 hours. Kyra monitored the temperature. She could already feel the heat from a distance. She knew when to add coal, when to remove the air supply, and when to close the damper. The first batch was a failure. Cracks, uneven firing, and a dull color. Aiden wasn't discouraged. The first pancake is always a mess. That rule had held true in both Houston and Aurelia. The second batch, 3 days later, was better. Fewer cracks, a more even color. The third was even better. By the fourth batch, Ben had grasped the principle. His hands remembered the clay. His fingers knew the temperature. All he needed was the technique. Aiden provided the technique. Westmarch's first porcelain cup was rough, thick-walled, uneven, but white. Real porcelain. Ben held it in his hands and couldn't believe it. He'd been making pots his whole life, ordinary clay pots. Now he was holding porcelain, which was 10 times more expensive, and which he'd made himself. The system confirmed it. Porcelain production had begun. D-rank quality. Unit cost, 3 gold coins with a market price of 5 gold coins for C rank. Growth potential, S rank, plus 41 insight points. 3 industries, peat, metallurgy, and porcelain. The revaluation criterion has been met. On the 60th day, Aiden recalculated his resources. Population, 247 souls. He needs 500. Income, 190 gold pieces over 2 months. Annualized projection, 1,140. 2 stone buildings, a smithy, and a clinic. At least 3 are needed. He planned the third one, a school. Oswald was already teaching 15 children under a canopy, on the ground, with chalk on slates. A building is needed. A garrison is needed. 0 swords. That was the main shortcoming. Without a garrison, a C rank is impossible. Even if everything else is perfect, the inspector will give a D just for the lack of military protection. And a D means write-off. Where to get soldiers? Not peasants with pitchforks. Real soldiers. Swords. Formation. Discipline. He didn't have the money for mercenaries. A contract with the cheapest unit cost at least 200 gold pieces a year. He had 100 in reserve and a growing, though slow, income. He thought about it every evening, and every evening he found no answer. The answer came on the 70th day, in the form of a woman riding a weary horse, with a sword at her belt, and with 40 armed horsemen behind her. They set up camp 2 hours' ride from Westmarch. The system detected them at dawn. 40 figures, all armed, all on horseback. A military camp. Sentries, patrols, professionals. Lines of text flashed above each one, but from such a distance, Aiden could see only the general details. Unit, the Greyhounds. Strength, 40. Commander, Hannah Delgreen, 26 years old. Contract type, clearing Westmarch Province for inspection. Client, House Wellguard. Clearing. That word hit Aiden in the gut. Clearing the province for inspection. The Wellguards weren't going to wait for a reassessment. They'd decided to destroy Westmarch before the inspector arrived. Burn, kill, disperse. And then buy the land from the treasury for a song. A classic hostile takeover. In Houston, they did things like this through the courts and the tax authorities. Here, it was done with swords. 40 swords against 12 peasants with axes. The math was simple. And deadly. Aiden stood by the window and looked out at the horizon. His heart beat steadily. He felt fear, but it was under control. In a past life, he'd stood before a board of directors that was about to lay off his entire department. 200 people, their families, their mortgages, their futures. And he'd found a solution. Not perfect, but it worked. Here, the stakes were higher. Not layoffs, but death. But the principle was the same. When you're attacked with force, you don't respond with force. You respond with what your opponent lacks. Marvin lacked brains. Aiden responded with paper. The Velguards lacked something. He thought. He thought for an hour. Then he realized. The Velguards had no truth on their side. They'd paid mercenaries to do their dirty work. But mercenaries are a business. Mercenaries work for money. And if you offer them more money and better terms, they'll switch sides. Not out of morality, out of self-interest. Aiden took Kyra and Derek, the three of them, unarmed, without armor. He headed for the Greyhounds camp, on foot. It was madness. Any military council would have called it suicide. 3 people walking toward a camp of 40 mercenaries, unarmed. But Aiden knew something that no military council knew. He knew the commander. The system had shown him Hannah Del Green an hour before they approached the camp. Hannah Del Green, 26 years old. Fencing, 79 out of 100. Tactics, 72 out of 100. Leadership, 68 out of 100. Hidden talent, strategy, S-rank potential. Hidden secret, her real name is not Hannah Del Green. Former royal knight, stripped of her rank for refusing to execute the children of a rebellious baron. The royal court considers her dead. Loyalty, 0 out of 100. Aiden read these lines and smiled. A woman who refused to kill children, who was stripped of her rank for it, who has been living under an assumed name for 15 years, and who had been hired to clean up the province where the children lived. The Volgards didn't know who they'd hired. They'd hired a sword, but this sword had a conscience. A patrol spotted them half a mile away. 2 horsemen rode up, swords drawn. Aiden raised his hands, empty, unarmed. He said he'd come to speak with the commander, that he was Baron Westmarch, that he had a proposal. They escorted him into the camp. Hannah was sitting by the fire, tall, lean, a scar running from her temple to her chin, short, light hair, gray, cold eyes. She looked up at Aiden from below. She didn't stand up. She didn't bow. She showed no respect whatsoever. He was the target of the contract, a kid who needed to be taken out. Aiden sat down across from her without being invited. He pulled 2 scrolls from his bosom. He placed the first one in front of Hannah. It was the Velguard contract. She was surprised. She asked how he knew its contents. He said he knew. He unrolled the second scroll himself. These were his books. Westmarch's accounting, revenues, expenses, forecasts, every figure, every coin. He showed her how much Westmarch was earning now, how much it would earn in 6 months, how much in a year. He showed her the raw materials, iron, porcelain, the land's potential, the people's potential. He showed her figures that no baron in the northern district had ever seen, because no baron kept accounts. They counted money in sacks. He counted it in spreadsheets. Hannah read, silently, for 10 minutes. 20. Aiden didn't rush her. She looked up. She asked what he was offering. He offered a contract. Not for a cleanup, for security. 28 gold pieces per person per month. 40 swordsmen. 1,120 gold pieces per month. A 7-year contract. Hannah didn't blink. She said the Velguards paid 20 per person. A one-time payment. 800 gold for the job. He was offering more. Much more. But for the long term. That meant being tied down. That meant obligations. Mercenaries don't like long-term contracts. Aiden said one thing. He didn't need them to die for him. The appraiser reached Westmarch 3 days later. But it wasn't the appraiser Aiden had been expecting. It wasn't a guild inspector. It was a scout. The system had flagged him half a day before his arrival. Balthazar Krug, 38 years old. Rating, 54 out of 100. Bureaucracy, 67 out of 100. Hidden talent? None. Hidden secret. Works for Ansel Vale. Receives 20 gold pieces a month for unofficial reports. Loyalty? 0. Not an inspector. A spy. Uncle Ansel sent his man under the guise of an early assessor to compile a dossier on Westmarch. To know exactly what's going on here, Victor Lowe wasn't enough. Victor was a peasant. He saw peat and fire, but he didn't see the numbers. Ansel wanted numbers. Balthazar arrived on horseback, in a clean doublet, with the guild seal on a chain. The seal was genuine. He really was a member of the guild, a junior appraiser, 13th out of 13, the weakest, the most corrupt. Aiden met him at the village entrance with Lyra and Hannah. Lyra was carrying a folder of documents. Hannah stood in full armor with a sword at her belt. 40 greyhounds stood behind her, in formation, silent. Balthazar saw the mercenaries and turned pale. He had expected to find a swamp with 200 starving peasants. He found a garrison. Aiden was polite. He invited Balthazar into the village headman's house. He seated him at the table. He offered tea. Mayrin brewed tea from local herbs. Not junk. Real delicious tea. Balthazar drank and looked around. His eyes darted across the room. He was counting. That was his job, to count and report. Aiden opened the books in front of him. Not all of them, only the ones he wanted to show. Peat, production volumes, sales, revenue, the blacksmith shop, tool production, the first sales of iron shovels and axes to neighboring provinces, the clinic, number of patients, decline in mortality, porcelain, first samples. He didn't show the gold. He didn't show the full extent of the resources. He didn't show the loyalty program. Did not show anything that would give Ansel an advantage. Showed enough for Balthazar to understand one thing. Westmarch is not dying. Westmarch is growing. And that's a problem for those who bet on its demise. Balthazar spent 2 days in Westmarch. He walked around the village. He looked at the construction sites. He counted the people. He peeked into the blacksmith shop. He handled the porcelain cups. He jotted things down in a notebook. The system displayed every entry he made. He wrote honestly. The numbers matched what Aiden had seen. Because Balthazar was a poor assessor, but not a fool. He saw what he saw. Stacks of peat, iron in the furnace, stone in the walls, people at work. On the second evening, he asked for a private conversation with Aiden. They sat by the fireplace. Balthazar spoke plainly. He works for Ansel Vale. Aiden nodded. He knew. Balthazar asked where he'd heard it. Aiden said it didn't matter. Balthazar was silent for a moment. Then he said that Aiden had a problem. Ansel didn't just want Westmarch to fail the reevaluation. Ansel wanted Westmarch to cease to exist. Because if Westmarch received a B rating or higher, by law, Aiden would gain the right to vote on the clan council. And a vote on the council meant the right to demand an investigation. An investigation into his father's death. Ansel understands this, and he's willing to do anything. Aiden asked what he meant by anything. Balthazar said that Ansel had contacted the Appraisers Guild, specifically the Pure faction, those who trade in rankings. He paid them so that the appraiser who would arrive for the reassessment would assign an F, regardless of the province's actual condition. The contract amount was 2,000 gold pieces. It felt like a punch in the gut. Not because Aiden hadn't expected such treachery from his uncle. He had, but 2,000 gold pieces was on a whole other level. This wasn't a petty scheme. This was serious money invested in his destruction. Balthazar continued. He said he wasn't telling him this out of kindness. It was a calculated move. Ansel pays him 20 gold pieces a month. If Aiden offered more, Balthazar would work for him. A double agent. Aiden looked at this man. 38 years old, an ordinary face, shifty eyes. A man who had betrayed every employer he'd ever had, and who would betray Aiden at the first opportunity. In his past life, Daniel Cho had worked with people like this. Corporate rats. They're useful exactly until the moment it's no longer in their interest to be useful. Then they bite. Aiden offered 30 gold pieces a month. Balthazar agreed instantly. Too quickly. Which meant he would have settled for 25. But Aiden didn't haggle. The 5 gold pieces above the offer was the price of loyalty. Temporary, unreliable, but sufficient for the next 3 months. The system recorded it. Balthazar's loyalty rating, 0.11. Low, even after being bribed. This man cannot be trusted with anything important. But he can be used. Balthazar left on the 3rd day. He'll take a report to Ansel. An honest report. Westmarch is growing. The Baron isn't a fool. There's a garrison. And he'll also take another report to Ansel. A secret one. For Aiden. The names of Ansel's people. A schedule of meetings. Contacts in the guild. Aiden sat alone after Balthazar's departure and thought. 2,000 gold pieces. The Appraisers Guild. A rigged inspection. Even if he built a perfect S-ranked province, the inspector would give it an F because he'd been paid off. So he needed to change the inspector. Or change the rules. Or change both. He didn't know how yet, but he knew who could help. Myrene, whose father is a guild appraiser from the Pure faction, the very same inspector Ansel had bribed. A father Myrene hadn't seen in 24 years, who doesn't know about her, but she knows about him, and she'll suggest blackmailing him when her loyalty reaches 50. Right now, she's at 56. She's already ready. Aiden didn't go to her, not that evening. Blackmail is a last resort. First, he needs to try everything else first. On the 80th day, Yuna's son arrived. Not like the others. Not on foot. Not of her own free will. She was carried in. 2 peasants found her on the road 3 hours to the south. Unconscious. Beaten. Robbed. Her carriage had been ransacked near the provincial border. The coachman had been killed. The maid had fled. She'd been left on the road. Myrene tended to her for 2 days. A broken rib. Bruises. Dehydration. Nothing life-threatening, but painful. The system showed Yuna's son, 20 years old. Etiquette, 81 out of 100. Diplomacy, 74 out of 100. Strategy, 63 out of 100. Hidden talent, politics. S-rank potential. A hidden secret. Yuna taught him every day. 2 hours in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. How to stand, how to sit, how to bow, how to eat, how to hold a goblet, how to turn your head when addressed by a superior, how to remain silent so that the silence sounded like an answer. Aiden listened and memorized. His body was young and flexible. His muscle memory formed quickly, but habits from his past life got in the way. Daniel Cho slumped in his chair. Aiden Vale was supposed to sit up straight. Daniel Cho looked people in the eye. Aiden Vale was supposed to look slightly below the forehead when speaking to an equal and at the bridge of the nose when speaking to a superior. Daniel Cho spoke with his hands. Aiden Vale was supposed to keep his hands on his knees unless he was eating or writing. Yuna was a ruthless teacher. She corrected every gesture, every step, every turn. Without shouting, without anger, with the cold precision of a surgeon. She cut away his habits just as Myrene cut away rotten flesh. Painful, but necessary. Meanwhile, Aiden was building. 90 days until the reassessment. The population had surpassed 280. Oswald School was rising from the stone on the northern outskirts, the 3rd stone structure. 22 children were learning to read and counting. Among them was Toby Green, 11 years old, S-rank potential in arithmetic. Oswald noticed him during the first week. The boy solved problems in his head faster than Lyra could on paper. Oswald told Aiden that in 30 years of teaching, he had never seen a student like that. Never. Aiden nodded. He saw the line above Toby's head every day. S-rank, future genius, a future accountant or treasurer or manager. If he survives. If he gets an education. If the province holds out. And one more child, Ron Kerr, 7 years old, a carpenter's son, S-rank potential in appraisal. This boy could become an appraiser, a real one, not a bought-off one, not from the guild, one of their own. Aiden didn't yet know how to unlock that potential. The system showed the ability, but not the instructions. It was a puzzle to be solved later. Pete provided a steady income. 3 merchants came by regularly, twice a month, paying 80 gold pieces per shipment. Kyra's iron went toward tools and weapons for the garrison. Hannah was training 12 peasant volunteers who wanted to become soldiers. Derek was among them. From a clumsy digger, he was turning into something resembling a fighter. Slowly, but Hannah said he was stubborn, and stubbornness is more important than talent. Ben Reed's porcelain was improving with every batch. The quality had risen from D to C. The cups had become thinner, the color was more even. The glaze, which Aiden had formulated from memory of his past life, applied smoothly. The first batch of porcelain went to a merchant for 60 gold pieces, 10 cups at 6 gold pieces each. In the capital, such a cup would cost 15, but it's a good start. On the 100th day, Aiden convened a council. Not a small one like last time, a full one. All the key people: Lyra, Kyra, Mayrin, Hannah, Una, Derek, Thomas, Oswald, Ben, Elder Holt. 10 people at the table. Lines glowed above each of them. He could see their loyalty scores. Holt, 62. Lyra, 31. Kyra, 54. Mayrin, 58. Hannah, 42. Una, 28. Derek, 61. Thomas, 45. Oswald, 38. Ben, 33. Team average, 45.2. Good numbers. Not great, but stable. He spread a map out on the table. A large one, drawn by Ivy. A map of Westmarch. Every house, every field, every workshop, every trail. Accurate to the step. Ivy had spent a week drawing it. The result was so detailed that Una stood frozen over the map for a minute and said that the Royal Cartographic Chamber did do a worse job. Aiden began to speak. 80 days until the reassessment. Here's what they have. Population, 283. Need, 500. Shortfall, 217 people. Income, 420 gold pieces over 3.5 months. Extrapolated over a year, that's over 1,000. That's enough. 3 stone buildings, a blacksmith shop, a clinic, a school. Minimum requirement met. 3 industries, peat, metallurgy, and porcelain. Check. Garrison, 40 mercenaries plus 12 militiamen. Check. 1 problem, the population. 283 instead of 500. This isn't a failure on just one criterion. It's a failure of the main criterion. Without 500 people, a C rank is impossible, even if everything else is perfect. Lyra looked up from her notes. She said that over the last month, the growth rate had been 15 people per week. Over 80 days, that's about 170. Total, 453. We're 47 short. Hannah said we could count her people. 40 mercenaries, if they're permanent residents. Legally, a 7-year contract makes them residents. That brings the total to 493. We're 7 short. 7 people. Aiden looked at Hannah. She shrugged. 7 people in 80 days. We'll find them. We have to find them. But that was the optimistic scenario. If the growth rate drops, if an epidemic breaks out, if Marvin or the Velguards strike again, any deviation and the numbers won't add up. Una raised her hand, slender, white, with long pianist's fingers. She said that the population wasn't the only problem. There was a second one. The appraiser. The system showed that Ansel had paid 2,000 gold for an F rank. Aiden hadn't told the team about this. Until now. He told them now. The silence at the table was so thick you could hear the candle crackling. Kyra slammed her fist on the table. Derek clenched his jaw. Holt turned pale. Mayrin didn't move. She sat motionless. Her face was stony. Because the appraiser Ansel had bought was her father. She knew. She had always known who her father was. She didn't know he'd been bought. Now she knew. Mayrin looked up. She looked at Aiden and said she could help with this. Everyone looked at her. She said in an even voice that the appraiser who would be sent to re-evaluate Westmarch was Arthur O'Dale, her father. He didn't know she was his daughter, but she could change that. Silence. Hannah asked how. Mayron said simply she would go out to him, tell him who she was, show him her mother's locket which she had worn around her neck since birth, and ask if he was capable of giving an F to the province where his only child lived. It wasn't blackmail. It was worse. It was the truth. Aiden looked at Mayron. She sat upright, her hands on the table, her face calm. For 24 years she had carried this secret. For 24 years she had known who her father was, and not once had she come to him. Because he had cast her mother out. Because he had sought neither his wife nor his daughter. Because to him they didn't exist. And now she was ready to stand before him. Not for herself, for the 283 people she treated every day. For the clinic they'd built for her. For the microscope on the shelf. For Derek's little girl whom she'd saved from a fever. For their sake. The system flashed. Mayron's loyalty, 58. 71. A 13-point jump the moment she uttered the word father. Because the decision to stand before the man who betrayed you for the sake of the people who accepted you isn't loyalty to the Baron. It's loyalty to home. Aiden nodded. He accepted it. No discussion, no haggling, no asking questions she didn't want to hear. The council meeting continued. They discussed building a dock on the river. Yuna suggested sending an official invitation to the 3 neighboring minor barons. An alliance. A trade alliance. Not a military one. 3 barons who, too, fear being overvalued. Who, too, need resources. To whom Westmarch could sell peat, iron, and porcelain at below-market prices in exchange for people, settlers, whom these barons cannot feed. Lyra did the math. If each of the 3 barons sends 30 families, that's 90 families, about 350 people. Westmarch will surpass the 600 mark, with room to spare. Aiden looked at Yuna. She looked back at him. Calm. Cold. But deep in her eyes was something that hadn't been there before. Interest. The lively, passionate interest of someone who had realized that her dead idea was alive. Her family had been wiped out for attempting to reform the land valuation system. She'd thought the idea had died with her father. And now an 18-year-old baron from a marshy province was doing exactly what her family had been slaughtered for. And he was doing it better, because he was starting from the bottom, not from the top, not with reform, from the marshes, from the peat, from the people. The council meeting ended late. Everyone had left. Aiden was alone. Lyra lingered at the door. She said she'd transcribed everything, every word, every number. She asked if he believed they'd make it in time. Aiden looked at her, thin, serious. A 17-year-old girl who hadn't smiled since her brother died, who sat at the table every night and wrote until dawn, who knew every number in Westmarch by heart. He said he didn't know. He said there had been moments in his life when the numbers didn't add up, when the calculations pointed to failure, when logic told him to give up. And every time something changed. Not a miracle, not luck. A person. One person who did one thing right, and everything shifted. Lyra listened. Then she said she hated it when he spoke in riddles, but that she would keep calculating, because numbers were the only thing she trusted. She left. Aiden sat in the dark. A map of ivy hung above the table. Westmarch. 283 souls. 80 days. A bribed inspector. An uncle who wants him dead. Neighbors who want his land. A guild that wants his secret. He rested his head in his hands. In his past life, he'd never been this exhausted. Because in his past life, only money was at stake. Here, names were at stake. Graham Holt. Lyra. Kyra. Myron. Hannah. Yuna. Ivy. Derek. Thomas. Toby. Ron. Elsa Broden and her 3 children. 283 names, each one weighing on his shoulders. He closed his eyes. The system flashed in the darkness. Total insight points, 1,247. Gaze level, 3 out of 10. Depth, 120 meters. 2,000 points to level 4. He's still far from it. But he'll get there, because he has no other choice. He isn't building a castle, he's building a home. For the 283 people who haven't yet realized their home. Yuna wrote 3 letters, each on a separate sheet of parchment. Each bore the seal of Westmarch. Each contained phrasing that Aiden didn't know and wouldn't have understood without her. The language of the aristocracy. Not words, but codes. Every turn of phrase meant more than it seemed. The invitation to a trade alliance sounded like a proposal to equals, not a request, not a plea. A proposal from a province that knows its worth. Yuna dictated, Lyra wrote, Aiden studied. 3 barons, Caspar Doyle of Grey Keys, a province 40 miles to the west. 600 souls, rank C at the last reassessment. The land is poor, harvests are declining. They need peat for fuel, they need iron for tools. They fear a new reassessment because their rank could drop to D. Wilhelm Hunt of Stonebridge, 30 miles to the east. 800 souls, rank B-. The trade route through his lands is drying up because the Velgard have diverted the caravans to their own route. She needs an alternative commodity. Westmarch porcelain could be that commodity. Adele Morton of Quiet Hills, 20 miles to the north. Population 400. Rank D. Almost a death sentence. Her late husband drank and gambled away half their land. She runs the place alone. 2 small children. She has too many people she can't feed. She needs an ally with resources. 3 letters were sent out, with 3 couriers on the same day. Aiden paid each courier a silver coin. Fast legs cost money. The replies arrived a week later. Caspar Doyle agreed to meet. Wilhelm Hunt agreed to meet. Adele Morton arrived on her own, without warning, the very next day after receiving the letter, on horseback, alone, without guards. The system flagged her 2 hours before her arrival. Adele Morton, 32 years old. Management, 56 out of 100. Horseback riding, 71 out of 100. Trade, 43 out of 100. Hidden talent, diplomacy, B-rank potential. A hidden secret. Her husband hadn't gambled away the land. The Velgards had taken the land by forging Iowas. Her husband drank not out of weakness, but out of helplessness. Loyalty, 0. She rode into Westmarch and stopped her horse by the blacksmith shop. She dismounted. She looked around. She saw the stone walls of the infirmary. She saw the school. She saw stacks of peat. She saw the garrison in formation. She saw Kyra at the anvil. She saw porcelain cups on the table in Ben's workshop. Her face betrayed nothing, but Aiden could see it through the system. Adele was counting, just like him. She looked out at Westmarch and converted everything she saw into gold. She was an administrator, a poor one by this world's standards, a good one by the standards of what she'd been dealt. A woman who had carried a dying province on her shoulders for 2 years without help and without hope. Aiden met her on the porch. Yuna stood behind his right shoulder. Lyra was behind his left. Hannah was at the gate. The whole picture. A baron with an advisor, a secretary, and a garrison. Not a village, a province. Adele looked at him, at the young man. 18 years old. She was almost twice his age. She'd seen dozens of barons, young and old, smart and stupid. This one was different. She couldn't explain why, but she could feel it. They talked for 2 hours. Aiden showed her the books, the numbers, the plans. He explained what he was offering. Peat at cost, iron at a 20% discount off the market price, porcelain at wholesale price. In exchange for people. Families that Adele couldn't feed. 30 families, about 120 people. They would move to Westmarch. They would get homes, jobs, food. silver every evening. Adele listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She didn't haggle. She just listened to the numbers, and when Aiden finished, she asked one question. Why? Why was he doing this? What was in it for him? He could sell peat and iron at market price and earn 3 times as much. Why would he need people he had to feed, clothe, and build homes for? Aiden answered with a single word. Revaluation. He needed 500 souls for a C rank. Every person isn't just a mouth to feed. Every person is a voice, and hands, and a future. Adele was silent for a minute. Then she said she wouldn't give up 30 families. 40, because she had 40 families who were starving. And if Aiden fed people with silver every evening, she had no right to keep them hungry for the sake of her own pride. The system showed Adele Morton's loyalty at 0.24, a jump of 24 points in a single conversation. Casper Doyle arrived 3 days later, a tough man in his 50s, silent, cautious. He didn't provide any people, but he signed a trade contract for peat, 200 cartloads a year at a fixed price, a steady income, 400 gold pieces a year. Wilhelm Hunt arrived last, young, 26, nervous. His province was losing money every month because the Velgardas were stifling his trade. He signed a contract for porcelain, 500 pieces a year, and brought 15 families, about 60 people. Total, 40 families from Adelaide, about 160 people. 15 families from Wilhelm, about 60, plus natural growth. Lyra did the math. By the day of the reassessment, Westmarch should pass the 520 soul mark, with room to spare, if nothing happens. But something always happens. On the 120th day, settlers from Adelaide began arriving. The first 10 families, 43 people, exhausted, hungry, children with wide eyes on gaunt faces, women carrying everything they owned on their backs, men who walked in silence and never looked up. Aiden greeted each family, personally. He called them by name. He showed each one to their home. Thomas was building barracks, simple ones, wooden, but with a roof, a floor, and a stove. Not made of stone. There was no time for stone, but they were sturdy, warm, with windows. Each family received a tool, a shovel, a pickaxe, or a knife. Every adult was assigned a task: peat harvesting, construction, or farming. The system recorded it. Population 283,326. Loyalty of new residents, 5 to 15. Low. They didn't believe yet, but they ate. Every evening. Meat, porridge, or bread. And silver, handed out. By name. It worked. Slowly, but it worked. On the 131st day, something happened that Aiden feared more than a fire. More mercenaries. More of Uncle's men. Derek Moss came to him at night, pale, shaking. His daughter had fallen ill again. Swamp fever. For the second time. Mayron examined the girl. Marin's face was stony. The bark of a hin tree. The last portion. The one she'd been saving for an emergency. She gave her the decoction. The fever broke, but more slowly than the first time. Her body was getting used to it. The second bout was worse. The girl lay on a cot in the clinic, breathing with a wheeze. Derek sat beside her, holding her hand. His wife stood by the wall and didn't cry. She had run out of tears. Mayron worked all night. Compresses, decoctions, pure water. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She didn't stop. By dawn, the girl's breathing had evened out. Her fever had broken. The crisis had passed. But Mayron told Aiden the truth. The bark was gone. If there was a third attack, she wouldn't be able to help. They needed a hin tree. They needed a steady supply. A 3-day journey south, into the forests controlled by the Velgards. Aiden faced a new challenge. The life-saving medicine grew on foreign soil. Enemy territory. Enemies who had already tried to destroy him. who had hired mercenaries to wipe him out, who had forged Adele's husband's IOUs. He couldn't send people through Velgard territory. They'd be intercepted. He couldn't buy the bark through middlemen. The Velgards controlled all the trade routes to the south. But the river didn't flow through Velgard territory. It flowed through Crown lands. And the southern forests bordered the river on the other bank. The dock, the one he'd planned but hadn't had time to build. Now it was no longer a plan but a necessity. He called Thomas. The dock. In 10 days. Thomas said it was impossible. Aiden said he had no choice. The girl would die. Thomas looked at him. Then at the infirmary where Derek's daughter lay, and nodded. 8 days, not 10. 8. Because Thomas Kerr, too, knew what the word impossible sounded like. It sounded like a challenge. Thomas built the pier in 7 days, not 8. 7. He worked 20 hours a day. Derek worked alongside him. Not because Aiden ordered him to, because his daughter was lying in the infirmary, and every hour without medicine was an hour closer to a third seizure. Kira forged the brackets and nails in 2 days. Hannah assigned 10 men from the garrison to do the heavy labor. Lyra kept track of the wood and iron used. The pier was rough, made of wood, 3 mooring posts, piers on stilts, a canopy for cargo, but it stood, and a flat-bottomed barge could moor there. Aiden bought the barge from a fisherman in a village downstream. Old, patched up, but seaworthy. 12 gold pieces. The first voyage set out on the 8th day, Derek and 2 peasants, down the river. 3 days, to the southern forests. Mayrin drew a cinch tree on parchment. The bark, the leaves, the shape of the trunk, so they wouldn't get it mixed up. They left at dawn. Aiden stood on the dock and watched as the barge disappeared around the bend. The system didn't work outside Westmarch. He couldn't see them, couldn't assess the danger, couldn't help. For the first time in 4 months, he was blind. 3 days downstream, a day to gather bark. 3 days back, a week. If all went well, if the Velgards didn't intercept them, if the river didn't let them down. If. Aiden hated that word. In his past life, he'd worked with concrete data. The numbers didn't lie, the graphs didn't deceive. Here, half the variables were unknown. While he waited, he built. He didn't stop for a single day. The population grew. 380, 410, 430. Families from Adelaide and Wilhelm were arriving in a steady stream. He greeted each one. He housed each one. He found work for each one. Lyra kept records, a thick notebook, names, families, skills, assignments. She worked like a machine, without glitches, without fatigue, or so it seemed. Aiden could see from the system that her health was declining. 54 out of 100. 3 months ago it had been 67. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating on time. She didn't stop. She was burning up at work like peat, slowly and voraciously. He told her to rest. She replied that she'd rest after the reassessment. He said there were 60 days until the reassessment, and if she collapsed, there'd be no one left to do the counting. She looked at him. For the first time in a month, there was something in her eyes besides numbers. Something resembling gratitude, or surprise, that the Baron had noticed, that someone had noticed. She agreed to sleep 6 hours instead of 4, a compromise. Lyra didn't know how to give in completely. The system updated. Lyra's loyalty, 31. 38. On the 141st day, Balthazar sent a pigeon. A small scroll tied to its leg. A cipher that Aiden had devised himself. A simple substitution of letters. Balthazar reported that Ansel was preparing the final strike. Not through Marvin, not through the Velgards. Personally. Ansel would travel to appraiser Arthur O'Deal a week before the reassessment. He'll bring the remaining money, 1,000 gold pieces, the second half of the contract. And he'll add a condition. Not just an F rank. A plague report. A false report that there's an outbreak in Westmarch. Quarantine. A trade ban. culling of livestock. This was worse than a rank F. This was annihilation. Not of the province. People. A plague quarantine meant that royal troops would cordon off Westmarch. No one would enter, no one would leave. For months. Perhaps forever. Aiden stood with the pigeon scroll in his hand and, for the first time in 4 months, felt the ground slipping away from under his feet. His uncle wasn't playing chess. His uncle was playing for annihilation. Total, irreversible. 2,000 gold for a rank F. That was insurance. A false plague quarantine. That was a death sentence. He sat down on the porch, closed his eyes. Thought. In a past life, he'd seen companies destroy their competitors through regulators. A bribed inspection. A false report. The closure of a business. It's not the market that bankrupts a company, but a piece of paper with a seal. It's the same here. A piece of paper with the appraiser's seal and a signature. That's all. He opened his eyes. Yuna was standing in front of him. She saw the look on his face. She asked what had happened. He told her. Yuna listened in silence. Her expression didn't change. She had grown up in a world where things like this happened every day. Her family had been destroyed the same way. A piece of paper, a seal, a false accusation. She said one thing. She said she had a map. In the lining of her dress, a map of the secret royal mines, the only copy. Her family had been killed for that map. The map shows where the crown hides gold, silver, and iron from its own barons. If this map falls into the right hands, the entire appraisal system will collapse. Because provincial rankings are calculated based on known resources. If it turns out that the crown is hiding resources, then every ranking for every province will be false. And the Appraisers Guild, which has been covering, will be destroyed. Aiden looked at her. She stood before him, thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes. An aristocrat without a family, a refugee without a home, with a map worth an entire kingdom sewn into her lining. She could have sold that map for thousands of gold pieces. She could have traded it for a new life. For safety, for a home. Instead, she was offering it to him. Why? Because he was doing what her father had died for. Because Westmarch was proof that reform was possible. 50 days until the reassessment. Population 467. 33 people short of 500. The growth rate had dropped from 15 a week to 8. Winter was approaching. The roads were getting worse. Refugees preferred to settle closer to home rather than head north toward the swamp baron, about whom strange rumors circulated. Aiden counted every evening. 8 a week. 7 weeks until the reassessment. 56 people. Enough. Just barely, but enough, if nothing happens. On the 150th day, Hannah came to him at dawn. Her face was ashen. She said her scouts had intercepted a messenger. The messenger was riding from Clear Meadows to the Velgard estate. He was carrying a letter. Marvin Vale had written to the senior Velgard. The letter was brief. Marvin reported that his people in the capital had learned about Westmarch, about the peat, the iron, the porcelain, the garrison, the dock, and the alliances with the 3 barons. Marvin wrote that Westmarch must be stopped before the reassessment. That one appraiser wasn't enough, that a strike was needed, a physical one, now. Velgard replied verbally via the same messenger. Hannah interrogated the messenger. He said that Velgard was preparing a detachment, not mercenaries, his own men. 80 swords. The target? The dock. Destroy the dock. Destroy the barge. Block the river. Without the river, Westmarch loses its trade route, loses its medicine, loses its connection to the southern markets, loses its income. Aiden sat at the table and listened to Hannah. 80 swords. He has 40 mercenaries and 20 militiamen. 60 against 80. The odds are bad, but not hopeless. Hannah said that in open terrain, 60 against 80 is a defeat, but on their own ground, with fortifications and knowledge of the terrain, the odds are even. The dock stands on the bank of the Yumi. It's surrounded on 3 sides by water and swamps. The only way to approach it is via a single trail from the southeast. If they fortify the trail and set up an ambush, the advantage shifts to the defenders. Aiden looked at the map. The system displayed the terrain. The trail ran through a narrow passage between two swamps, 30 meters wide, 1.5 kilometers long, the perfect spot for an ambush. He asked Hannah how long until the attack. She said 5 to 10 days. The Velguards aren't in a hurry. They're confident that Westmarch doesn't know. 5 days. Aiden looked at Kyra. She was standing by the door, listening. He asked how many stakes she could forge in 3 days. Kyra narrowed her eyes. She asked what kind. He pointed to a narrow spot on the map. Stakes, iron, sharpened, driven into the ground on both sides of the trail. Cavalry won't get through. Infantry will slow down. Kyra nodded. 200 in 3 days, if they provide people to stoke the forges and feed the metal. Hannah was laying out the positions. 20 archers on the hills on either side of the trail. No, there were no archers. 20 men with slings, stones, simple weapons, but effective from a height. 10 swordsmen at the barricade across the trail, the remaining 30 in reserve beyond the swamp, ready to strike the flank when the enemy gets bogged down. She was sketching a diagram with charcoal on the table, quickly, precisely. Lines of position, attack vectors, firing zones. Aiden watched and saw a professional, not a mercenary, a knight. The very same knight who once commanded the royal company, who knew how to fight, and who refused to kill children. Hannah looked up from the diagram. She said there was one problem. If the Velguards find out they're being ambushed, they won't come. They'll postpone the attack, or they'd change course. They needed the Velguards to think Westmarch wasn't ready. They needed a decoy, an unguarded dock, a rowboat at the pier. Silence. Ivy walked over to the table, silently. She placed a wax tablet on it. On it was a drawing, a trail, a swamp, and positions, and a small figure by the pier. The girl had drawn herself. She offered to be the decoy and observer at the pier. Alone, visible, so that the Velguard scouts would see the empty pier with a single child and report that there were no guards. Aiden said no, categorically. She's a child, 12 years old. He doesn't use children as bait. Ivy looked at him. Then she picked up a piece of charcoal. She drew another figure next to herself, a large one, with a sword. Hannah, hidden, close by, 10 steps away. Ivy would be visible. Hannah would be invisible. If anything went wrong, Hannah would pull her out in 3 seconds. Hannah looked at the drawing, then at Ivy, then at Aiden, and she nodded. She could do it. 3 seconds. She guaranteed it. Aiden looked at Ivy. 12 years old, mute, escaped from slave traders. She remembers the faces of the killers from the guild's basements. And now she's voluntarily offering to sit on the pier as a target to save the village where she's lived for 2 months? Loyalty 47, 53. He agreed, on one condition. Hannah 10 paces away, 2 fighters 20 paces away, an alarm at the slightest movement. 5 days passed in preparation. Kyra forged 220 stakes, more than she had promised. Derek and 10 men drove them into the ground at night. By day, the trail looked normal. By night, it turned into a trap. Hannah trained the militiamen, not in fencing, but in throwing stones and maintaining formation. One command. Stand. Don't run. Stand and hold the line. She'll take care of the rest herself. On the 155th day, Hannah's scouts reported. The Velguard detachment had set out. 72 men, not 80, but enough. Cavalry. Heavy cavalry. 2 days' march. Direction, the pier. Just as Hannah had predicted. That night, Aiden didn't sleep. He sat in the dark and counted. 72 against 60. On their own turf. With fortifications. With an ambush. The math was better than he'd feared. But math doesn't account for blood. Tomorrow, people will die. His people, the ones he knew by name. The ones whose loyalty he saw reflected in the numbers every day. The numbers will become zeros. The names will become memories. He wasn't ready for this. Daniel Cho had never lost people. He'd lost deals. He'd lost clients. He'd lost bonuses. Not people. Here, the losses were real. Mayreen approached him. She hadn't slept either. She was preparing the first aid station. bandages, suture thread, needles, herbal decoctions. She did it calmly and methodically, as always. She sat down beside him, silently. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. A minute later, she took his hand, briefly, squeezed it, let go, and went back to preparing. The system showed Mayrine's loyalty at 71, 74, 3 points, for a single touch. They arrived at dawn. Cavalry, heavy cavalry. The Velgard banners were hidden, but the armor was familiar. 72 riders stretched out along the trail in a column. A scout led the way. He could see the pier, a rowboat at the dock, a girl on the gangplank, sitting there throwing pebbles into the water. Silence. No guards. The scout raised his hand. The squad commander gave the signal. The column moved forward, at a trot, along a narrow path between two marshes, 30 meters wide, 1.5 kilometers to the pier. They had gone 300 meters when the first horse stepped on a stake. A scream. The horse fell. The rider was thrown over its head. The second horse crashed into the first. The third reared up. The column crumpled. The horses whinnied. The stakes were invisible in the mud, black iron in black earth. There were 220 of them, jutting out at an angle, aimed at the advancing riders. Hannah gave the signal, a whistle. 1. Short. Stones flew from the hills on both sides of the trail. 20 slingers, stones the size of a fist, from 30 meters away, into the tight column of horsemen, which couldn't spread out because there was swamp on both the right and left. The stones struck the helmets, the shoulders, the horses. The riders fell. The horses bucked. The formation fell apart. Commander Velgardov shouted. He tried to turn the unit around, but the trail was narrow. It was impossible to turn 70 horses around in 30 meters. Those in front were pushing forward. Those in the rear didn't understand what was happening. The middle of the column turned into a chaotic jumble of horses, people, mud, and stakes. Hannah struck from the flank. 30 swords emerged from the swamp, through the shallows, knee-deep in water. They emerged onto the trail behind the main group and cut off their retreat. The Velgards were surrounded. Stakes and a barricade in front, swamp to the right and left, Hannah's swords behind them, rocks above. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Not a battle, a massacre. The Velgards couldn't fight. They couldn't run. They couldn't regroup. The horses were stuck in the mud. The riders dismounted and sank waist-deep into the swamp. Hannah wielded her sword with icy composure. Every strike was precise. Every step was calculated. She didn't kill unless necessary. She knocked weapons out of their hands. She knocked them to the ground. She tied them up. Her men did the same. Professionals. 40 minutes later, 53 people lay on the trail. Most were alive, bound, wounded. 19 had fled across the swamp, abandoning their horses and weapons. Westmarch's losses, 4 wounded, not a single casualty. Mayrin worked for 3 hours. She bandaged, stitched, and cleaned wounds, her own men's and the enemy's alike, without distinction. To her, a wounded enemy was a patient, not an enemy. Hannah led Aiden to the commander of the Velgard detachment, a burly man of about 35, a gash across his forehead, his hands bound, vicious eyes. The system showed Gareth Velgard, 35 years old, fencing, 58 out of 100. The youngest son of House Velgard, a hidden secret. An order from his father, destroy the pier. Kill the Baron if the... Kill the Baron. Not just destroy the pier, kill. Aiden stood before this man and said nothing. In his past life, his toughest negotiation had been a meeting with lawyers from a company that was trying to sue him for a report that was too accurate. The lawyers were angry, but they didn't want to kill him. Here, they did. He crouched down in front of Gareth. He looked him in the eyes. He said he had 2 options. The first, Aiden would send 53 prisoners to the capital with a full report on the attack on the Baron's province by the kingdom. With names, with testimonies, with a map, with Ivy's drawings. The House of Velgard would be stripped of its title for an armed attack on a neighboring province during peacetime. The law is clear. It's a rebellion against the crown. Second, Gareth signs a confession. In person. In front of witnesses. That House Velgard hired a squad to destroy property and murder Baron Westmarch. This confession will go into the safe. Not to the capital. In the safe. And it will remain there as long as the Welgards keep a low profile. If the Welgards touch Westmarch again, the confession will be sent to the king. Gareth looked at him. He was silent. He was thinking. The first option meant the death of his house. The second was a leash, a collar. The Velgards would be on a leash to the boy Baron. He chose the second. He signed it. In front of witnesses, Hannah and 2 of her men. Lyra made a copy. Aidan hid the original. The captives were released, unarmed, without horses, on foot, toward the Velgard estates. 26 horses remained in Westmarch. The weapons remained, the armor remained. The total value of the spoils, as estimated by the system, was 1,800 gold. More than Westmarch's entire revenue for 4 months. Hannah stood beside him and watched the prisoners leave. She said she hadn't expected. Aidan asked what. She said she hadn't expected him to let them go. Any other baron would have executed the commander and sold the rest into slavery. That would have been the lawful response, the right one by this world's standards, the profitable one. 53 slaves is a fortune. Aidan shook his head. He said that slaves don't build houses, slaves build prisons, and he needs a house. Hannah was silent for a minute. Then she said quietly that his name wasn't Hannah Del Green. Aidan looked at her. Day 178, 2 days until the reassessment. Westmarch's population, 512 souls. Aidan stood on a hill north of the village and looked down. He didn't recognize the place. 5 months ago, there had been 17 houses with smoke rising from 4 chimneys. Now, down below, lay a settlement. Not a village, a settlement. 42 houses, 4 stone buildings, a blacksmith shop, a clinic, a school, the community center that Thomas had finished a week ago, a dock on the river, 2 rowboats, stacks of peat, Ben's workshop with a porcelain kiln, a garrison, barracks, the parade ground where Hannah drilled the militiamen every morning, fields, plowed, sown, green. The system displayed an overview of Westmarch. Population 512. Annual income 2,400 gold. Industries 4. Peat, metallurgy, porcelain, agriculture. 4 stone buildings. Garrison, 40 professionals plus 28 militiamen. School, 34 students. Clinic, 1 doctor. Mortality rate over 5 months, 0%. Projected rank, excluding corruption, B+. B+. A province everyone had written off. One they gave him so he'd fail. One that was worth 0 by all measures 6 months ago. B+, excluding corruption. Keywords, excluding. Because corruption hasn't gone anywhere. Arthur O'Dale is coming tomorrow, with the guild's seal, with Ansell's money in his pocket, with orders to give an F and write a false report about the plague, and all the numbers Aidan has built up over 5 months will turn to dust with a single signature from one man, unless Aidan stops him. That evening, he gathered the team one last time. The community hall, a long table, 10 chairs, Lyra, Kyra, Mayron, Hannah, Una, Ivy, Derek, Thomas, Oswald, Elder Holt. Lines of light shone above each of them. Holt 74, Lyra 46, Kyra 67, Mayron 74, Hannah 63, Una 52, Derek 78, Thomas 58, Oswald 49, Ivy 53. He looked at each one, every face, every name, every number. 5 months ago he had arrived here alone, with a single trunk, up to his ankles in mud. Now, sitting at this table were people he knew, people he trusted, who trusted him. Not all unconditionally, not all completely, but enough to be sitting here, together, at night, before the day that would decide everything. He laid out the plan. In the morning, the assessor would arrive. He would be received according to protocol. Yuna had prepared the ceremony, the proper bows, the proper words, the proper food. Then the inspection, a full tour of the province, the blacksmith shop, the clinic, the school, the pier, the fields, the garrison, the books. Everything is out in the open. Everything is transparent. Let him see. If after the inspection he assigns an honest rating, the story will end well. If not, Myrene will step forward first. She'll show the medallion. She'll reveal who she is. That's the first blow, emotional and personal. If that doesn't work, Aiden will place the map of the secret mines on the table. That's the second blow, political. If the assessor signs a false report, the map will go to the king, and the guild will fall. If that doesn't work either, Ivy will show the drawing, the face of the killer from the basements, the face of Arthur O'Dale himself. That's the third blow, the last one, a criminal one. The silence at the table was absolute. Myrene sat motionless. She knew about the first move. She'd suggested it herself. She didn't know about the third, about Ivy's sketch, about the fact that her father wasn't just a corrupt appraiser, that he was a murderer, that he'd killed the parents of the 12-year-old girl sitting at this very table. Aiden looked at Mayron, then at Ivy. Two women connected by one man. One his daughter, the other his victim. He didn't say it out loud, not now. In the morning, if it came down to the third strike. The council meeting ended after midnight. Everyone left. Lyra lingered. She stood by the door with a folder in her hands. Thick, heavy. All of Westmarch's records for 5 months. Every number, every name, every coin. She said she'd counted everything 3 times, not a single mistake. If the appraiser wanted to check any figure, he'd find it confirmed. She set the folder on the table, looked at Aiden, said she didn't know who he was, that she didn't believe in the old family charts, that she didn't believe an 18-year-old boy could know so much about the land, about people, about money, about construction, about medicine, about metallurgy. That she'd counted, and the numbers just didn't add up for an ordinary person. But that she didn't care, because whoever he was, he'd done what he'd done. 512 people are alive, well-fed, and working, and their children are learning to read. That's not just a number, it's the truth, and that's enough. She left. Aiden sat alone. Lyra's loyalty, 46. 50. 50. The threshold. The system description had said so. Threshold 50. It tells of a mother. It places a black jade seal on the table. She didn't talk about her mother. She didn't place the seal. But she did something else. She said she didn't care who he was. For Lyra, that was more than the seal. More than a secret. It was acceptance. The morning of the 180th day. Rain, light, cold. Just like the day he arrived. The carriage pulled through the gates of Westmarch at 9 in the morning. Black, bearing the crest of the Appraisers Guild. 4 horses, a coachman, a guard, and inside, Arthur O'Dale. The system had flagged him an hour ago. Arthur O'Dale, 52 years old, rating 84 out of 100. Bureaucracy, 79 out of 100. Hidden talent, analytical skills, A-rank potential. Hidden secret. Killed 2 traitorous appraisers in the guild's basements 10 years ago. Receives money from Ansel Vale for a false report. Amount, 2,000 gold. Loyalty, 0. He stepped out of the carriage. Tall, thin, heavy eyelids, thin lips. The face of a man who had long since stopped looking people in the eye. Yuna greeted him according to protocol. Perfect. Every gesture in its place, every word precise. Arthur O'Dale raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected such etiquette in this marshy province. The inspection lasted 4 hours. Aiden led him personally. The smithy. Kyra showed him the converter. She showed him the blades. She showed him the brand. The infirmary. Mayrin showed him the wards, the instruments, the microscope. She stood 3 steps away from her father, and he didn't know who she was. The school. Oswald showed him the students. Toby Green was solving problems on the blackboard. An 11-year-old boy with S-rank potential could calculate in his head faster than an appraiser could on paper. Arthur O'Dale looked at the boy for a long time, then he turned away. The pier, barges, the trade route, Lyra's books, every number, every report. He flipped through the pages. His face betrayed nothing, but Aiden could see it through the system. A war was raging inside him. He had come to give an F. He saw a B+. The facts didn't match the order. The numbers didn't match the money in his pocket. After the inspection, they sat down in the community hall. Arthur O'Dale, Aiden, and between them a table bearing the guild's seal and a blank scroll for the verdict. 512 people stood outside, in the rain, in silence. Arthur O'Dale picked up a quill. He dipped it in ink and began to write. Aiden saw the letters, upside down but legible. Westmarch Province, inspection conducted, condition. He paused. The quill froze over the paper. His hand didn't move. He sat like that for 10 seconds, 20. Then he looked up at Aiden and began to write again. Unsatisfactory. Recommendation. Quarantine due to suspected plague. Grade F. He was lying. He saw exactly what Aiden saw, and he was lying. Because 2,000 gold pieces outweighed the truth. Aiden nodded to Mayrin. She was standing by the wall. She stepped forward. She took the locket off her neck. She placed it on the table in front of Arthur. A silver locket with initials, M.O., Mayrin O'Dale. She spoke a single sentence. She said she was his daughter. Arthur O'Dale dropped his quill. Ink smudged across the scroll. He looked at the locket, then at Mayrin. His face was gray, ashen. He recognized the locket. He had given it to that woman 25 years ago. The woman he had cast aside, whom he had forgotten, who had given birth to his daughter in a convent and died when his daughter was 6. Mayrin stood before him, upright, calm, with his mother's eyes. He could see it. He couldn't help but see it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He couldn't speak. Mayrin said she wasn't asking for his love. She wasn't asking for acknowledgement. She was asking for one thing, the truth. She turned toward the window. Outside the window, in the rain, stood 512 people. Her patients, her neighbors, the children she had treated, the women she had saved, the men whose wounds she had stitched up. She asked if he was capable of signing their death warrants, knowing that his daughter stood among them. Arthur O'Dale sat motionless. A minute. 2. Then he reached for the scroll, slowly, and began to write over the old text. New letters, different letters. Aiden watched, holding his breath. Condition, satisfactory. Sectors, 4. Infrastructure, compliant. Garrison, available. Population, 512 souls. Rank. The quill froze. Arthur O'Dale stared at the letter he was supposed to write. His hand trembled. People stood outside the window. His daughter sat before him. In his pocket lay the money he'd been paid to lie. He wrote. B. He put a period. He affixed the guild seal. He slumped back in his chair. He closed his eyes. Aiden looked at the scroll. Westmarch. Rank B. Not B+, not A. Just B. But B meant life. B meant the province would remain, that the title would remain, that 512 people would remain, that everything he'd fought for over the past 5 months wouldn't turn to dust. He didn't use the map of the mines. He didn't use Ivy's drawing. He didn't need to. One medallion was enough. One daughter. One true word. He stood up. He walked over to the door of the community hall. He opened it. 512 people were standing in the rain, looking at him. Lyra with a folder. Kyra with a hammer on her belt. Mayrin with tear-filled eyes. Hannah with a sword. Yuna standing tall. Ivy with a piece of coal in her hand. Derek holding his daughter in his arms. Thomas with his wife. Oswald with a book. Town Elder Holt with his hands folded across his chest. And behind them, everyone. Peat cutters, blacksmiths, potters, builders, soldiers, mothers, children, everyone. Aiden said one word. Rank B. Silence. A second. 2. Then Derek screamed. Not a word, a sound, a roar, relief and joy and rage all at once. The screen caught on. 512 voices, in the rain, in the mud, on the marsh everyone thought was dead. The system flared up. Loyalty numbers danced above each person. Up, up, up. Insight points flowed like a river. The total score surpassed 4,000. Gaze level 3. 4. Unlocked. Depth 300 meters. Strategist's gaze. Forecast of military threats within a 50-mile radius. Assessment of political alliances. New data poured in, but Aiden wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the people, at their faces, at their eyes, at the arms embracing children, at the shoulders shaking with sobs, at the smiles. He stood in the doorway and smiled, and at that moment, a second carriage drove through the gates of Westmarch. Black, but not bearing the Guild's coat of arms, bearing the Crown's coat of arms. A golden lion on a blue field. A royal envoy. The carriage stopped. The door opened. A man in a purple cloak stepped out. A golden chain hung from his chest. The seal of His Majesty's Chancellery. He looked at the crowd, at the rain, at the mud, at Aiden. He approached. He took out a scroll, unrolled it, and read aloud. Baron Aiden Vale, His Majesty King Aurelius invites you to court, immediately. The Chancellery has questions for you regarding the origin of your gift and the circumstances of your inheritance. In particular, the Crown has a question regarding an event that took place in another world in a 41-story building. Aiden's smile faded. His face turned pale. The 41-story building, the elevator, the cable, the rat. They knew. Someone knew. The messenger rolled up the scroll. He bowed. He got into the carriage. The carriage turned around and drove out of the gate. Aiden stood in the doorway of the community center. Rain ran down his face. Behind him in the room sat the appraiser who had just assigned a B rank and was holding the hand of his daughter, whom he hadn't seen in 24 years. In front of him stood 512 people who were shouting with joy and could not hear the envoy's words. And above the Ankwald blade hanging on the wall of the community hall, a line flashed for a second. A line he did not notice. He missed it because he was looking at the people, not the wall. The line glowed for 3 seconds and then faded. Returned to the rightful heir. The contract is fulfilled. The rain stopped by evening. The sun rose over Westmarch, over the rooftops, over Kyra's smithy, over Mayrin's clinic, over Oswald's school, over the pier that Thomas had built, over the fields, over the marshes, over everything that was once mud and has become a home. The system displayed the day's final line. Quiet, faintly glowing, hanging over the entire province from one end to the other. Westmarch. Official rank, B. True rank, according to the appraiser system, A+. Population, 512 souls. Loyalty, average, 68 out of 100. Status, Baron. Alive. Days since arrival, 180. Aiden stood on the hill and looked at his home. Not a castle, a home, for 512 people who had finally realized they were home.